This is the D6 generation with your hosts, Craig Gallant.
No, cut that. Keep that. Someday it's going to be worth something.
Russ Wakeland.
You put me in an ATST with frickin' Wookiees attacking me and whatnot?
Now you're talking. And Mack Martin in the third chair.
Why can't it ever just go smooth?
With contributions from Total Fangirl
Vampires do not sparkle.
and our loyal listeners.
Crazy? That's like 400 hours of gamer nonsense.
Welcome to another edition of Rapid Fire, the roundtable discussion of all things gaming. Coming at the speed of a unit of Poitanian knights charging their mighty steeds into a filthy scion of Set.
What?
Today's edition is brought to you by all of our friends over at Patreon, the people, the men, the women, the children, the pets that are keeping the lights on and keeping this ridiculousness that is the D6 generation rolling. And today I'd like to thank Ted Elric, Thunder Chicken. That's two separate people. I don't want anybody thinking Ted Elric's nickname is Thunder Chicken. Tim Crosthwaite, Tim Reinhardt, Tim Wyatt. I'm Geekly McNair again, your host. Today our panelists are Russ Warlord Wakeland and the ruler of roleplay, the master of miniatures, the dominar of designers, Mack, master of mankind, Martin. Let's begin. Issue number 1. Conan the Barbarian, the archetype of our modern concept of the barbarian hero, was created by Robert E. Howard in a series of fantasy stories published in Weird Tales magazine in 1932, starting in 1932. Now featured in countless novels, comics, television shows, and movies, where would we be without this iconic, larger-than-life savage? Question. Although Conan, as we now know him, first appeared in 1932, an earlier story submitted the year before featured a character reliving past lives, one of which was a black-haired barbarian named Conan who swore by the god Crom. What was that story called? Rasco Spequin Russ.
I'm going to go with Pals in Time.
Mad Simeon Mack.
I believe you'll find it was Wuthering Heights.
That's close. Sadly, no, that makes you both wrong. The answer is actually People of the Dark.
Oh.
I thought that was a very easily guessed title.
Sure.
Issue number 2. In military tactics, a flanking maneuver refers to the movement of an armed force around the sides of the enemy's position to achieve an advantageous vantage point over that enemy's location. Flanking is often advantageous because a force's offensive power is concentrated to its front, weakening its flank or sides. Question. On a scale of 1 through 10, with 1 being the Italian defeat at Adwa in 1896 and 10 being the Norman victory at Sarami in 1063, how important to a good war game is a decent mechanic for flanking? Agrippa Russ.
I'm going to say 8.5.
Militaries Mac.
Pie.
That's pretty good.
That is very close. Sadly, and it's a shame to say wrong, but wrong! The answer would actually be Napoleon's defeat of the Third Coalition, and as such cannot be quantified on this particular 1 to 10 scale. Issue number 3. Warhammer 40,000 8th edition has only been available to the public for purchase for 5 days when we record this, and already nearly every store in the country is running low on starters and rulebooks, and it's almost impossible to pick up the hottest indexes. Those books required to use existing armies in the game. Although it's early days yet, it's hard to argue that 8th edition might just be breathing new life into a flagging franchise. Question. Although the background is rich and well-developed after over 30 years, it all started with Rick Priestley's vision. What was the classic literary inspiration for the Horus heresy, the great betrayal at the heart of the 40K backstory? Azaria Kairos Russ.
I don't know, but it feels Greek.
Reclusiarch Michaelis Mack.
It would be Greek if it wasn't directly taken from SpongeBob.
That is actually true. There is an episode of SpongeBob that is based on Milton's Paradise Lost. So we're going to give you a roundabout half credit on that one. Who knew, though? Milton's Paradise Lost. Issue number 4, Curses. Some believe in them. Some do not believe in them. And yet there they are, messing things up for everyone, whether you believe in them or not. It could be sports teams that haven't won a pennant in a century, or countries that haven't won a war in a similar length of time. And then, of course, there's the infamous, bone-chilling, unearthly, soul-numbing curse of them all, the D6 generation curse of the Kickstarter.
Yeah, tough.
Question.
Yeah.
The ages-old quote, leaning back on the best laid plans of men and rodents, often comes to mind in moments when a curse manifests. What is the name of the Bobby Burns poem that features that fantastic chestnut? Alistair Reed Russ.
I hate rodents.
Edwin Morgan Mack.
The problem is I know this one, and I can't remember the name of it now. So
And
I'm just
that's what makes it.
Oh,
Yeah.
I got nothing.
Oh, the sound of pain. Oh, ready?
Yes.
You relinquish your last moment of hope.
My brain can't get past Steinbeck. I can't remember his reference.
No. To a mouse. To a mouse. Best laid plans of mice and men oft go agley by Bobby Burns, the Scottish poet laureate, in the poem To a Mouse. Upon turning him up in my field. And the entire title is really, really long, but it's originally To a Mouse. And that's it for now. Thanks for listening, and good night.
This episode of the D6 Generation is brought to you by Lone Wolf Development. Take your game to the next level.
And by Geek Nation Tours. Rise up and join the Geek Nation, touring the world at geeknationtours.com.
And by Audible. Try the service, get a free book, and support the show. All by visiting audibletrial.com/D6G.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey.
On tune.
Hey, welcome to episode 216, Craig.
216. Now we're starting to sound like a year. Like
I
in
know,
the
right?
year 216. It's
Really.
kind of crazy.
Of the D6 Generation, I am Russ Wakeland.
I am Craig Gallant.
And I'm Mack Martin.
Hey, Mac!
Martin.
Welcome back to the show, sir. So excited to have you on here. This is
Thanks
fantastic.
for having me.
So Mac is, of course, game designer extraordinaire, involved in many a project. So many, numerous, really. It's really hard to count them all. So happy to have you back on the show. We're going to talk a bit. We spoke with Mac, and as longtime listeners will know, we record this show out of sequence. So I have to give you a little bit of peek behind the curtain here. So what happens is we record the show over 2 different Wednesdays, over 2 different weeks. And on the first Wednesday, we record a main segment. And on the second Wednesday, we do achievements and a different segment. So on the first Wednesday, we did this great segment about this great, cool project that Mac's working on called Conan, right, Mac? What's the full name?
Conan Rise of Monsters, yeah.
Conan Rise of Monsters. Now, there's also, Craig, as you may remember, there is a curse associated with the show in Kickstarters, is there not?
No way.
No
way. Blood and Plunder broke that curse.
It did. Blood and Plunder is the exception that may or may not have...
No. It's not an exception. It broke the curse.
Okay, good.
Isn't that how curses work?
That's what
you
I
break
thought.
them and you're safe.
But since we recorded that segment with Mac, which will still air on this episode, because I think people will find it fascinating to know what the kind of effort that went into this, how much passion there was. But Mac, we had a sort of a challenge here right after recording, right? A few days later.
Like less than an hour ago.
Less than an hour ago.
Like moments before going live in this episode. Right. So
right. Yeah. So between last episode and this one, Pulposaurus has canceled the Kickstarter.
Oh.
It's such a bummer.
It is a bummer because I got so excited as we were talking about it. I'm like, man, this is awesome.
And it was such a great game, but business decisions are business decisions, and you can push through, but you gotta do what you gotta do.
You gotta do what's right.
That's a terrible way to put it, but I'm not the guy who gets to look at numbers, and sometimes those numbers don't come back with something that is as sustainable as you thought.
Yeah. So it's too bad, but I think it's important I think it's good for everybody to understand the amount of passion and effort that goes into these Kickstarters, even the ones that don't make it. So you'll hear Mac and us talking a little later in this episode about all that and about the excitement that we genuinely had and the excitement Mac had for it going and reflecting of the whole team that was working on the project. And it's really a shame it didn't work out, but I think it's good to know what happened there. Go ahead.
I think it's telling that Shane also took the approach of canceling it rather than grabbing the money and then not delivering.
Exactly. That's a good point. That's a really good point, Mac. It's the right thing to do. So
it was $108,000 sitting there. He could have had.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm sure it was a very hard decision. So, but yeah, we'll talk about a little bit about the game, and we'll also add a little announcement there for those who might fast forward right to it. That unfortunately, the Kickstarter did not make it.
I think at one point during that that segment we do say, "Turn off your podcast and go pledge."
Back. Right? Yes. Don't.
I would recommend you not do that.
You won't find it. So
I don't think that'll work.
It won't work out. And then later, though, we will talk about an exciting topic, which is Mac and and Craig and I have been talking a lot. Mack's a long time. I mean, Mack's a miniature gamer of miniature gamers, basically, and so we would talk a lot about what are some of the trends in 2017 in miniature gaming, the mechanics, the way they're going now. What is changing about miniature gaming? How do we define a modern, air quotes, modern, right, miniature war game? So we'll talk about that a little later.
Because it's all in flux again.
It is. There's changes are coming, Craig. They're coming.
It's a great, yet again, another great time to be a miniatures gamer.
It is.
The sleeping bear is rising.
It is. The sleeping bear is out of his cave. Hibernation has ended, if it will. But now, first, before we get to all that, though, Craig, we have this little thing called the Lost Chapters.
We do. Our genius money-making scheme, if you will.
Yes. And Mac, do you remember, we ran into Mac at Dunkin' Donuts. Mac, do you remember what we spoke about in Dunkin' Donuts?
I believe we were talking about some of the changes in 8th edition that we dig.
Yeah, right, exactly. We decided, we've gotten some early access. Yeah, go ahead.
And what we hoped to see in the future.
Yes.
And Mac, I have some good news for you.
Yeah.
Did I get what I wanted with my Bloodthirster?
No, you got what you wanted with a big giant robot being able to pick up a vehicle and throw it at another unit. I believe you said you wanted a knight to be able to pick up a rhino and throw it at another unit, and you now have that.
You do.
And is this a thing where I can literally just bring rhinos as ammunition and just have a row of rhinos behind my...
Technically, I think the rules don't let you attack your own models, so you have to hope that your opponent brings the ammunition. But if you have a knight, and there are knights on both the Chaos side and the Imperial side in the new rules, and they have a weapon called a Thunder Fist, which is a giant power fist. A knight is basically it's a giant robot with a guy inside it driving it. It's a mini Titan mecha kind of thing.
It's a very 40K mecha, but it's a mecha.
So he's got a big giant fist. If he destroys a vehicle
or a monstrous creature,
mm-hmm. And you roll a 4+, you can then do. I think it's is it within 6 inches or 12 inches, Russ? I can't remember the range exactly.
But basically, you do some number of mortal wounds, right?
Of mortal wounds to another unit.
To another unit within a certain range. So basically, you're hucking it at somebody, which is awesome.
Yeah,
that's wonderful. The only flaw, of course, is that we're one edition too late to also be able to use the rhino as a template, but I'll take what I'm getting.
You can't have everything, Mac. You can't have
everything, Mac.
Can't have it all. I'll take
Where would you put it?
But for those of you who do want everything, meaning everything that Craig and I produce on this show, along with our third chairs,
and why would you not? It's all such gems.
The best way to hear us talk about things in the Lost Chapters, like some of the things we're excited about in 8th edition 40K. Craig, how does one go about getting a subscription to the Lost Chapters?
There's really 2 routes, Russ.
Mm-hmm.
There's the easy route, which would be go to Patreon and look for the D6 Generation. Or there's the other route, which would be go to the D6 Generation, find the Patreon button, press that, and that will take you directly to the page. Actually, I think it's probably an equal number of clicks in both directions. Mm-hmm. And then there's a video explaining it. I highly recommend you not watch that. Yeah. And basically, it gives you the option of kicking a little tip into the tip jar every episode. And if you are pledging $2 or more per episode, every Lost Chapter we have ever made is unlocked for you immediately, Netflix fashion, so it all drops on you at once.
Exactly right. So that's going down. That's a great way to get involved in the show and also get some extra content, which we love. Now, also, we are still waiting on approval for our Gen Con event. I don't really know what's going on with Gen Con, but they're taking a while to get to this thing. I've heard from others who are also in a similar position, so I'm not really sure if they're just flooded or what. I am still cautiously optimistic that we will get approved, but so we're waiting to see. But we're still targeting Thursday night, 8 p.m. at Gen Con for 2 hours to go ahead and do the D6G Play by Mob and record with us live, assuming we get approved. So we'll let you know as soon as we know. So we're waiting to hear on that.
If not, we'll meet in the middle of the street. Ooh, that rhymed.
We will be meeting in the middle of the street. Now, Mac, I know you are familiar with Torg, are you not?
I'm familiar with it in the I remember playing it a couple times when I was younger.
Yeah.
It was around my group of gamers. It was the primary choice. You played one of two things, Torg or Rifts.
Right.
I played them both before we discovered Shadowrun, rediscovered Shadowrun. It was just, we were teenagers, so it was a hot mess. So my memory of Torg is positive but vague.
Right.
And then I like the idea of that I can do anything and that it's going to get nuts.
Right. Well, that's awesome because as you know, the Torg Kickstarter is well underway. And
Doing great.
we had our friend Dean Gilbert on the show, who is heavily involved in the Torg project. And he was kind enough to offer some massive prizes, Craig, to our listeners.
Yes, indeed.
And you're going to get the two prizes that he's been kind enough to, and the Torg team have been kind enough to let us give away here. One is the GM kit, which holds everything you need to play Torg Eternity.
Yep.
And then also we've got the cargo box.
That would be the super bonus prize.
Right. And so what you want to do to be able to be eligible to win this, and Max, since you are not officially involved in the project, I'm guessing you could enter too. All you need to do is tweet your idea for a mashup of 2 or 3 genres that you think would be great for Torg Eternity. And tweet that along with the hashtag D6GPickMe and the hashtag Torg Eternity. If you pull that, then by July 1st, so there's not much time after this episode airs. We talked about it last episode. But get that tweet out by July 1st, and then we'll go through along with Dean and pick our favorites, and 2 of those will win 2 different prizes, either the GM kit or the cargo.
One
box.
will win the big prize, and one will win the very cool but slightly less cool prize.
Exactly.
I'm going to go with Buddy Cops meets turn of the century romance.
Nice.
Oh, see, don't give them ideas.
Oh yeah,
giving them ideas.
There's been some good ones. We've already got some good submissions. My favorite one is
I was looking.
My favorite is one so far. I mean, I shouldn't say favorite because I have no favorites, Craig. It's going to be based on a fair contest.
No. By all means, tilt your hand.
But Ravenloft meets House of Cards meets Avatar. How can you go wrong with
that? I did like that.
That's kind of awesome. So if you've got a great idea, if you're like, I can beat that. Go ahead and tweet us that along with hashtag D6GPickMe, hashtag Torg Eternity, and get that tweet out before July 1st.
Yep.
Does that make sense there, Mr. Gallant?
It makes sense to moi.
Do you know what it's time now for?
I'm guessing it's probably going to be time for Achievements in Gaming.
It is indeed. And achievements, of course, brought to us by all of our friends over at Patreon. And this is the part of the show we talk about what we've been playing lately. So, Mac, what kind of, analog games, if you will, pulp games, if you will, have you been playing lately, sir?
You mean like tabletop-wise?
Exactly right.
Ars Magica, Shadowrun, and 8th edition 40K.
Ooh, a busy little beaver. Now, how many games of 8th edition have you got on your belt now?
I've only gotten 3 under my belt.
That's a lot.
That is a lot.
Well, it's not as many as I'd need to form a concrete opinion.
Yeah.
But all the models I own, I've found a operational use for on the battlefield, so that's something.
How big have your games been? How big have your games been, and which armies have you tried so far?
Grey Knights and 2,000 points.
Excellent. And what kind of opponents have you faced?
I had a split game where we teamed up against Tau and Orcs. It was me and a guard player against Tau and Orcs.
Yep.
And then I have played against Khorne Demons, or I shouldn't say Khorne Demons, Chaos, but very Khorne themed. And I played once against a guard player.
Okay, nice. And so, how are you feeling? I know it's too early to form a serious opinion, but are you liking it? Are you excited for your next round? Are you feeling the love?
I can form the opinion that I'm having fun, right? Like I'm enjoying it.
That's good.
It's got me painting models again. I've got both some the new guard, the Astromil, the Scalarium, whatever the new elite guys are. I forgot the name. And then I have some sisters on the painting table.
Oh, nice. So you're all getting engaged too. Right? That's great. That's awesome. So that's great, Mac, and I think that's exciting. It's good to see the action going on there. Craig, how about yourself, sir? What are you playing?
Well, let's see. You and I played Rune Wars last week.
We did.
That did not go well.
Did for me. It went very well for me.
Yes, it went very well for Russ.
It did.
It was very disheartening. I think we came to the conclusion that even though we doubled up the starter boxes, so we were playing at a full 200 points, we still only have the units from the starter boxes to play with.
Right.
And that the undead have a very, very, very difficult and narrow path to victory in the starter box. If you're going to win with the undead, I believe there's like maybe one way you can try to pull it off. And it was very frustrating that the army seemed to be like it should be able to work in other ways and didn't. And I thought I was in a very good position. I thought I had Russ kind of on the ropes. I thought there was a moment where with just a slight modicum of luck, I should have probably been able to pull it off, but I couldn't make anything work. All of my abilities were just a little bit harder to do than I could really put together. All of my guys went a little bit slower than they would need to go before any of you of Russ's human guys, and it just seemed like there were barriers to pretty much everything I tried to do, other than shooting and casting one particular type of spell. So if I want to spam shooting in one particular type of spell and then have my hand-to-hand guys to mop up, I think maybe that gives me an opportunity, or I have to get way better at managing Blight.
Well, see, there's your problem. You're supposed to be questing for runes, and here you are doing all this attack and stuff.
Exactly, clearly.
Yeah, that's your problem.
Yep. So, again, nothing against the game system itself. I think the game system is great. I think playing with terrain was awesome. Russ and I played with fully painted armies for the first time. We used terrain. Everything was great. It looked really nice. I think removing the dials, I think, Russ, really makes it good.
Yeah.
As they get activated, we removed the dials. So there was one point every turn where you got to see the battlefield with no dials or anything, and just a few of the tokens. I like the way the game works. I just think that in the starter box, the skeletons are on the ropes coming out of the gate. And only how and we'll talk about this being kind of endemic to starter boxes in a moment.
Exactly.
But we had fun. We
did have fun.
And then Russ,
it's rough to do a starter box like that though, because you got to get the two sides have to have roughly equal plastic, but at the same time, you don't want to design the two armies to be a mirror of each other. So one of them has to be a slightly more horde-driven army. So that one's always going to have a harder time simply because you want them to have weaker troops.
Yes.
Well, they in the Rune Wars starter box, they come with exactly the same amount of plastic
on both sides. Right. I think that's the problem.
Right, and that you're going to see that happen on every starter box, and that's why you have this endemic in starter boxes.
Yes.
Every time I've been assigned a starter box, and anyone else I know who's been assigned one, when you start working on those, what goes in and how that's going to be built and how it plays, you do your darndest to make sure that starter is pretty even. But at the end of the day, you kind of have to just be like, I'm trying to get two players started in their armies, and I have to give them the stuff that's the core. But unfortunately, one of those armies has to be more reliant on its elites than its core, and it has to be going for numbers over, quantity over quality. So it has to break down.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's happening.
I agree.
I think
you think about
humans.
X-Wing is the same problem, right? The X-Wing starter box is boring, right? It's one X-Wing and two TIE fighters. That's just dull. So starter boxes in general are trouble. We'll talk more about that. Yeah,
and when they're all you have to work with,
right? That's the problem.
And I think that might be us because we're constantly trying to feed this ridiculous podcast. We are alpha strikers on all these games where we want to get into them. We want them played so we can review them and we can talk about them intelligently. So we're getting into them full bore when there's only starter boxes or one or two extra things available.
Yeah, but right? I'd be in this one anyway, and I can't wait for more stuff.
Oh no, so would I.
Yeah.
So would I. I just ordered more stuff from eBay. But anyway,
can I ask a question? Because I'm curious.
Absolutely.
You said you've painted them up. I'm dying to know how they look painted.
Oh, are you on Twitter right now, Mac?
I will go to Twitter after the show to see these.
So check them. We tweeted them there and on our Facebook page. I think they look awesome. They're really good miniatures. Really good.
Oh, fantastic! That's fantastic. I've only seen them unpainted, and they weren't even primed. So I was like, well, they look fine, but do they hold a prime? Are they?
Yeah. So if you're
how sharp is the detail? You just don't know until you paint.
They look great. Go to if you're a Facebook user, go to Facebook. Go to the D6 Generation. We've got our header banner now is a little rotating movie of a bunch of our models that we both painted up. Okay, Craig did the undead. I did the humans. Also on our Twitter feed, we've got some pictures there too. I think they came out great and they look fantastic on the table.
I mean,
I think it's why we're so inspired.
As far as the detail goes, if you look at the wood grain of the ancient shattered shields of the undead.
Yep.
Right there, that says everything I need as far as the detail goes.
Yeah.
I'm looking at them right now, and you're right. They look fantastic.
Yeah, they look great.
Look at that four-armed golem guy.
The golems are so much fun, and the runes on their chest, and the detail. Like, so we get the command squads too. So the banner guys in there, the wizard, the champion, they look awesome. And the elves are coming out this summer, and they look fantastic. The models on the Fantasy Flight webpage look awesome for that. I'm going to buy the elf army as soon as it comes out. So I'm really psyched. I think it's great. The mechanics are awesome, but there's definitely they've got the classic starter box problem. And looking at the other units that they've previewed for the undead, I think, Craig, you and I can both see, if you had him in conjunction with the other stuff, now you could do some stuff. But right now, we're not really list building. We've just doubled the starter box size and essentially played with
and all
only
you're trying to do
tweaks.
is flesh it out with cards.
Yeah, without that list building ability and enough variety, and that's what's given, I think, 40K8 the nice jump start, is that everybody's already got the model. So it's just get us the rules and we're ready to go, right?
We're all playing. Yeah, we're all playing with all our toys right off the bat.
Yeah,
it's something a new game simply can't even try to do.
And let's talk about the example. So, Craig, the other game we played was 8th edition.
The other game, 8th edition, but all we had when we played it, because it was actually before all the indexes dropped on Saturday, we only had the starter box.
And we experienced, this time I was on the receiving end of what I thought was a bit of a balance issue in the starter box as well. I played the Marines, the Primaris Marines, and Craig played the Nurgle guys in the starter box. And I felt that with those particular force breakdowns, we played a mission. I'm not saying I did any brilliant tactics. I really didn't. But I thought I played reasonably well, and yet I really did minimal damage to Craig's force. I mean, very little was actually done to it. Yeah. And I was pretty much
wiped out. Well, it sounds to me like you just need to play the Primaris Marines against the Rune War skeletons, and you solve the problem.
That would solve the problem. Why didn't I think of that, Mac? That's brilliant.
That worked it all out.
Not everybody's been game designing for 10 years.
Yeah, this is right. And that kind of combines the whole Torg situation. Why don't we just pick Rune Wars and 40K and mash them all up? That'd be great.
Boom! There you go. You just won the big chest.
I'm pretty sure that's Warhammer Fantasy.
I'm pretty sure it is. Awesome. What else you playing, Craig?
Yeah. So we played that, and I felt bad because I agreed with Russ that the path to victory for the Primaris Marines was equally as narrow and equally as limited in its tactical choices as the skeletons from the Rune Wars. And I thought maybe they had a slightly better chance because they have a lot of tools, but they all have to be in the exact right place and do like one thing well. Whereas the skeletons, I think, don't really even have that kind of to fall back on. They've got a couple decent tools, and then everything else is just a little too slow and blah, blah, blah.
You've said that phrase a couple times now, a narrow path to victory, and I love it. I have been trying to describe to people how you balance a miniatures game, and it's about widening paths to victory or giving multiple paths to victory. And I it's so hard to describe. That's just such a great phrase for it.
Yeah, it just came to me last week
in a vision
between the two games that we played. Yeah,
well,
trademark, gallant concept.
Right.
And so this week I wanted to play again. Now, the interesting thing that happened on Saturday is that all of the new stuff dropped worldwide.
Yes.
The problem is that everyone immediately sold out of everything they had.
But Craig was like a ninja.
And no, I was not ninja-like because I pre-ordered.
There you go.
Through a friendly online store that was once a sponsor of ours.
Yes.
The two indexes I needed to play most of the armies that I own. So that would be, I have Space Marines, I have Space Wolves, I have Chaos up the wazoo. So I ordered the Chaos Index and the Space Marine Index and another full starter box, so that I would have all kinds of cool more Nurgle stuff to flesh out a new Nurgle army. All of that has been put on hold, and they've sold out of everything, and so I haven't received any of that. And it's very frustrating.
Yeah, but you ninja'd it for me. You did it. You ninja'd me.
No. This is what happened. Okay. I kind of sensed that was happening because normally you get those orders like the day before.
Right.
So I was like, "Oh, this is gonna be exciting," and then nothing showed up. And so I was like, you know what? Everything opens. They open at 10 a.m. The comic store in Nashua. They're awesome. They've been around for 100 years. They do that thing where for every $10 you spend there, you get a little punch. There used to be physical punches on actual index cards. Now it's all on the computer, but they still call it a punch, and I love it. And I've been in that system for literally 30 years. So that's how awesome. They were I think they might have been the second store I ever bought anything game oriented from, and they're still around. And they really have kind of reestablished their relationship with Games Workshop since this new rebirth that the company's gone through. And so I was like, that guy's going to have everything that I need. So I went down. Now I don't want to order the Space Marines and I don't want to order Chaos. I'm like, but I have that awesome huge guard army, and I knew that eventually I would get that index too. So I'm going to go buy that index. So I got there and it was chaos. They were pulling Dark Imperium boxes out of giant UPS crates that were getting sold as they were hitting the oxygen. They had little it was funny because everything was right up front, but it was almost like it was hidden in plain sight. So you had all of us, like men of a certain age, wandering around.
Men of a certain age.
Oh,
with a narrow path to victory. I must reach the rule book.
Yeah, muttering to each other. Have you seen the indexes? And I finally found literally just all up front, right in plain sight. But I was like, oh, they're over there. I was like, oh, damn, how can I friggin'?
I will make it.
So I picked up some stuff for myself, and then I tweeted to Russ. Didn't tweet. I texted to Russ. Because he lives right down the road. I'm like, hey, if you want to guard our codex, index, you got to come get it. And he was like, I'm in Boston doing awesome stuff. Well, you're running around doing nothing.
Well, it was Father's Day. Just for context, it was Father's Day was Sunday. This was the Saturday before, but my family surprised me. I'm a huge naval buff, and Sail Boston was happening. So all the tall ships, which come like once every 20 years to Boston, were in town. So they took me down there. And while I'm down there looking at all these tall ships, Craig's texting me, and I'm basically, buy all the things, texting back to him.
Yeah, so Russ was in Father's Day mode and decided to get it. So I went in, and I'm like, oh, I'll take one set of these dice and one set of these cards and this index. And then Russ is like, well, what do they got? Jesus. I was like down the road at a McDonald's getting a drink. I'm like, oh, okay.
Buy me all the stuff, dude.
So I went back and I looked at all the shelf and I sent him all the prices. He was like, yep, no problem. Buy it all. Like, okay. And but the guy was awesome. The guy was like, oh, you're buying for a friend now? I'm like, yeah, I'm buying for a friend. So Russ has the index he needs because that's the only army he's got. I have the index, so now I have to dig through it. But Russ, the index for the guard, it's going to be very hard to make detachments because you're no longer buying by platoon. You're buying by squad, and each squad takes up one troop slot.
Yes.
So I think the only way to go is the brigade, which gives you 9 rerolls.
So which is why would you not? Because the guard are terribly inaccurate. So you want all the rerolls you can get.
Exactly.
So
I think you're going to discover that your Lehman Russ is a bigger workhorse than my money's on that Lehman Russ.
Well, also I was
just fine.
Well, I did bring out all of my Lehman Russes for 3 different armies, so they're all painted different ways. But I have a large wall of Lehman Russes now
they
on
fight?
my table.
Have you fought with the Lehman Russes yet?
I have not because I'm finding it very difficult to, in the amount, this is the last week of school, so it's finals, and it's trying to grade everything, and they've just dumped this giant restructuring project on the whole English department. I don't have a lot of time outside of what I normally have, and so I'm finding it very difficult building matched play armies in a reasonable amount of time right now because you're flipping between the data sheets, in the front, which have all your information and your options, but then you have to flip to the back of the book where all the points are for matched play. And so I'm kind of like, I started and I was like, I can't do this. I don't have enough time. So that brings us to my other game that I have played, which was I played another starter box game with Rafe. Rafe has Space Marines, but has always loved Nurgle. So I just was up front. I was like, Rafe, the Space Marines have not won a game. Okay, I'll take them. No. I would like to take them. I have watched them lose. I have not played them yet, but I have watched them lose and beaten them several times. And I would like to I think there's a narrow path to victory, and I would like to see if I can pull it off. And so Rafe was like, oh yeah, I would love to do the Nurgle. So I set up all that terrain. Check the Twitter feeds for all the terrain, and the new industrial terrain from GW is awesome. It's beautiful, paints up really easily, really quickly. And we played the game, and the mission that we had, Russ, which was very interesting because again, this narrow path to victory that the Marines have precludes their being able to take a lot of objectives because you need to keep all your guys together.
You have to have overlapping fire. It's the only way they can win.
You need overlapping fire. You also need your lieutenants and your captain nearby so all their buffs are working for as many people as possible.
Because it feels like the problem is the Nurgle Marines have better saves than the Space Marines.
Well, they do, yeah.
So so you need a higher volume of fire to have a chance.
And more accurate.
Because weapons are roughly equivalent.
Lethal.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And you need, your core damage dealer is the plasma squad.
Right.
So they have to be kind of like in the middle of your force, protected by everybody else, but within range of everybody else's buffs and with line of sight And I just lucked out. I mean, I like a lot of things about the new 40K. One of the things I love that's right out of the box as soon as you start setting up the game is you can set up a table any way you want, and it looks awesome because you have no idea what the deployment zones are going to be.
No, the deployment zones are crazy. Yeah, they're really interesting.
There's 6 totally different, wacky, bizarre deployment zones, and they get chosen later in the opening the game process. So I set up all this really cool terrain, and one of the things that I like to do that I wanted to do when I bought the terrain was have 2 of these big coffee can cylinders with like walkways around them and then a walkway connecting them together. So it kind of looks like one big unit. So I set that up. And then the mission that we played was 4 objectives go down on the table. And so you're trying to take the objectives with heavy choices first, and then anybody else second. So a heavy choice takes precedent over anybody else. Basically, you're trying to position the fluff of the battle is you're trying to position your heavy units, your damage dealers on the battlefield to these locations. And so there were 4 different things, and Rafe put down 2 and I put down 2. And when I looked where they were and I looked at the deployment zones, not like I know that the meta game eventually is going to be there where people are going to know, okay, so I know if I'm starting first, so he's going to end up with the deployment zone. So I want to put the things so that there's no easy deployment zone choice. But
this is so early in the
I know
that's the game that you're like, I want to play with the big guns.
Right, that's where we are
exactly.
now. Mac.
I'm never going to play at that level. I'm just saying I know that eventually other people will be playing at that level, and so So I looked and I was like, well, I'm going to be able to set if I there's a couple different deployment zones I can use where I've got these 2 cylinders with the walkways and then a big walkway bridge connecting them, which would give me a really nice firing position to set up my plasma guys, and then all of my bolter guys kind of arrayed around them on the bottom to protect them from getting charged. And so that's what I was able to do, except that only gave me 1 objective. I had put 1 objective on that bridge, and that's all it gave me. There was nothing else in my deployment zone, whereas Rafe had 2, 1 move away, except that then you're looking at a draw. So he ended up having to come to me, and the Marines putting out that much firepower with all the buffs of the captains and everything, and Rafe the one thing that I think that I understood tactically why he was doing it, but I think it's a mistake in the long run, is he withheld his Chaos Lord till turn 3.
Oh, he's too powerful. That's how you killed me. You came in right into turn 1.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
But he thought that he did have a very good chance that that the bloat drone was going to get in on me on turn 2.
Right.
He thought there was going to be a lot of chaos, and then he'd be able to jump in and take advantage of that. Yeah. He wanted me to burn a couple rerolls. So he held him back. And when he held him back, that gave me an opportunity because in the new rules, of course, you can back out of hand-to-hand.
Yeah.
So the bloat drone came in, killed 2 Primaris Marines in one of my guard positions. Those guys then fell back, and there was the bloat drone floating underneath the bridge, like right in front of the bridge with all 5 plasma guys. And the plasma guys had been taking fire from the Chaos Marines, the Plague Marines that had been slowly moving towards us using cover very well. So I was able only to plink off 1 or 2 guys before that happened. Mm-hmm. But a crazy round of shooting with those plasma guns on maximal, supercharged, killed the bloat drone in 1 round.
Wow, that's fortuitous.
So it's crazy, but if you're thinking about it, like it's strength 8, so now it's they're wounding the bloat drone on 3s, and every wound does 2 wounds.
Yep.
And because the Primaris plasma gun is the best plasma gun in the game, it's -4 to your save, which means power armor doesn't help you at all. And that's what the bloat drone has. So it had to fall back on its 5+ resilience save, and because you're doing 2 wounds for every hit, I basically did 10 wounds, and he didn't save. He didn't get any 5+. So I did amazingly well.
He had bad luck.
He had really bad luck, and the thing died.
Yeah.
And then, so there was no big, snarl for the Lord to jump into and take advantage of. And then on top of that, in 1 turn, he had 3 failed charges, including his Lord.
Wow.
So I was never able to kill the Lord.
Well, you can't kill the Lord. That's the problem. He doesn't die.
I've had the Lord die on me, but like before he died, he did a lot of damage.
Right.
Well, you mentioned that Lord and how he waited to bring him in. I've been having it's the same. assessment problem is kind of what I call it. I'm so used to using my independent characters in a specific way that in this edition, when we've lost the certainty of being in a squad, right? That certainty is gone, but it's still there in that you can't just target them.
Right.
But I haven't adapted my internal kind of litmus, that kind of how I feel about things and internalize how the rules. And so now they feel much weaker. And I too have found myself less willing to throw them into problems. But then I look at them like they've got more wounds.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm telling you, Craig.
Couple that with your other with higher AP. Yeah. I thought the AP system was going to see us having less stuff die, but like your Primaris Marines, you're talking about them, and they're just dying. They die much quicker. Marines die much quicker than Marines did in previous editions.
I agree. But again, I think if Craig, if you'd left your leader out one extra turn, that game would have been completely different. Because he took literally before my guys could go, he took out the plasma gunners. And so that was and that was huge, right? So there's now you were deployed better, so Rafe maybe not had that move.
No, Rafe, because I was up on that elevated terrain and I had spread out, so there was nowhere that he could go in that 9 inches. Yeah. I mean, it was 9 inches away.
Yeah.
So 9 inches away gets him a 9 inch. A 9 inch. He would normally need an 8-inch charge to catch me, except that when you factor in now he's got to cross the like lateral movement and then climb up the ladder. It's actually further than 12 inches of actual movement that he needs to do. So he couldn't get an alpha strike in on those guys, but he could get an alpha strike in on the defending units I had underneath the towers. Right. But that's what he failed.
So that's your narrow path of victory. If your opponent keeps his leader off an extra turn, and if you can get 10 words on a blow on a one shot, and if your opponent can fail all 10 saves, you too can win with Marines.
Well, if you looked at the battlefield, you would have seen everything dead except for 4 models on the Chaos side.
That's good.
So I think I would have won even if he had brought him in sooner.
Yeah.
If everything else, like if he had still failed that initial charge. I mean, there were still things that needed to happen the way they happened, but it wasn't necessary. I think it wasn't as narrow as you're painting it, but it was still very, very narrow. Anyway, that's what I played. What about you, Russ? What have you played?
Well, just real quick, played Rune Wars, talked about that. Played 8th edition with Craig, talked about that. Played Clank with the family. Mac, have you seen this board game? Clank?
Clank?
Yeah, Clank.
I have not seen Clank. What's Clank?
So it's a lot of fun. The premise of this game, it is a deck builder, but don't let that throw you off. It's a board game.
Oh, I like deck builders.
The premise of this game is that each player is playing a hero going into a dungeon to raid some loot and get out. Now, when you start the game, what your hero can do each turn is based on actions in a little deck of cards you have. But of course, like any deck builder, you're going to be able to buy cards from a market and increase your deck. And some of these cards can be companions, so maybe now your guy's in a party, or some of these cards can be better weapons, or some of these cards can be whatever. So you kind of level your hero up, spells, whatever they are. What's interesting about it is that as you go through the dungeon, some of your cards will make noise, i.e. the clank. And you put these little cubes in this area that eventually go in a bag, and periodically throughout the game, the dragon who's guarding the dungeon will attack. And when he attacks, you're going to draw some number of cubes from the bag, and every time your colored cube comes out, your guy takes a wound. So the interesting thing is you're trying to get as deep into the dungeon as you can, grab the most valuable treasures as you can, and get out of the dungeon. And if you die below there's like 2 tiers to the dungeon. There's above the surface in the castle and below the surface in the dungeon part of the castle. If you die in the castle, so you got all the way into the dungeon, you got out of the dungeon, you're in the castle, but you haven't quite escaped yet. If you die there, you are out of the game, but your victory points still persist, so you could still win. If you die underground, you get no victory points. And as a player, if you escape the entire castle with whatever points you got, you get an additional 20 victory points for getting all the way out, and you kick off a timer that starts to get dragon attacking more and more and ends the game for your opponents. So there's this like push your luck element where you're trying to get in. Do you go, and of course the more valuable victory point treasure is deeper in the dungeon. So do you go shallow, grab something and get out? And then try to put the timer on your opponents to try to match your points? Or do you go deep, go for the big points, and then get out and hope you've really outplayed your companions? A lot of fun. This is the kind of game where it's one of my favorite kinds of games where I sat down with my family. None of them had played it before. I played it once before. Taught them the rules. By 15 minutes in, everybody knew the rules and was having fun. And there were stand-up cheering dice, or I shouldn't call them dice rolls, cube pulls from the bag at the end of the game. Like, oh my God, you're going to make it. Oh, you died. It was just so hilarious, so much fun. Highly recommend Clank, especially if you've got a family or some friends who are really into dungeon delves or Dungeons and Dragons. It's an automatic win for those folks. Let's see. Also, big news. I've told folks in the show before, my family's been playing, myself, my kids, and my niece and nephew and my brother have been playing 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. We just finally finished the last chapter in Horde of the Dragon Queen. We've been playing it for almost 2 years now. We just finished it. And now we are moving on to The Rise of Tiamat, the next big book. They just hit 8th level, and they're all excited, and they had a great epic battle at the end. It was good fun. I did manage to kill one party member. Well, not kill them, knock them down, but they managed to survive. But no one was actually permanently killed in the big final battle, so that was good. Thought it went pretty well. And finally, Craig, I just got a giant treasure chest in the mail.
I know. I saw it on Twitter.
Very
impressive looking. I have no idea what it is, but it's very impressive looking.
I backed the Widower's Wood Kickstarter a while ago. So for those who don't know, Widower's Wood is the new Privateer Press board game. So they released a few years ago. They released Undercity, which is a dungeon crawler co-op in the city of the Iron Kingdoms. Widower's Wood was the Kickstarter they just had about a year ago, which was the Hordes version of this. So same mechanics. The games interchange, so you can play with your Undercity models in the woods or your Hordes models in the Undercity. So it's basically it's just like War Machine and Hordes. It's an expansion on the game. And I backed it. My daughters and I liked Undercity so much, I backed Widower's Wood at the, let's just say, the premier level, which comes with a giant wooden treasure chest. I mean, literally, it looks like the kind of treasure chest you'd find in a dungeon to scale of a normal human. It's huge. And it comes with... It looks like, I don't think it actually is Broken Token, but it looks like Broken Token wooden inserts that you build that have enough stuff to nicely store everything from Widower's Wood and all the expansions and Kickstarter stretch goals, which I got because I got the big version. And then all the stuff from Undercity also fits in there. So it stores the entire collection in one giant treasure chest. And I said, look, Rose, the entire thing fits in the treasure chest. And she looked at it and she goes, not really very portable, is it? And I was like, no, but giant wooden treasure chest. What's your point? So, but anyway, I'm super excited to try it out. The kids are really excited, and that's pretty cool. So, What about modeling, Mac? What have you been doing for painting and modeling lately?
Well, I've got the Guard and the Sisters.
Yeah.
I'm also always moving through my Bones backlog slowly but surely. And I've got some terrain. I've got a full board at home. You know, I've got the big rollout mat from the fellows over at from Reese and the boys, and then I've got all the good 40K terrain that I finally found a friend with a table saw to make me the plates I needed to put them on. So I've got a city underworks, and that's
Nice.
going to be the. It's weird because those are harder to paint than I thought they'd be.
Oh yes,
and not because of the models, because of me.
oh yeah.
I want to do too much detail work, but every time I look at an actual real-life building, they don't have 100 colors on them.
No, but they also don't have 1,000 skulls on them either.
But the ones that do have all that kind of Gothic architecture, that's all one color of stone.
That's
right?
true.
It's not steel and stone.
Right.
That's true.
Yep.
So I gotta break myself of that habit and go a lighter tone instead of going multiple dark colors. And it's a hellscape for which I hold only Game Workshop responsible. It could not possibly be my fault at all.
No, of course not.
No.
Right.
No.
How dare they make cool models?
Indeed.
They do make cool models. Craig, what about yourself, sir? What have you been painting?
Let's see. I can't remember if I mentioned finishing the Rune War skeletons last time, but I did that. I have finished everybody but the Poxwalker zombies for the Nurgle from the 40K starter box. I love these models. These models are great. They're not very versatile for. Like, I'm going to have to really do some hacking and slashing on this second set to try to make them look different from the first set. But the models themselves look beautiful. They're crazy the way they come together. And they're very dynamic, and there's all kinds of crazy, creepy details. So loving that. Loving the Happy Seppuku stamps, the green stuff stamps for the bases. I think they came out great. And I did a couple more. I did the 3 jump pack space Primaris Marines in my Space Wolf colors, trying to get them up to snuff so I could put them on the flight stands. And that's my only complaint about all the new stuff so far, is that they redesigned the flight stands from the ground up, no pun intended, and they still suck.
Oh, I think they look pretty cool. I think they look awesome.
No, they look great,
Yeah.
but the way they're supposed, there is no hole for them to go into. So there's no portability. They're supposed to rest gently on one little curved part of the backpack, and then you glue it.
Yeah, glue it and store it.
Glue, but there's not much of a contact point,
I see.
is what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
that stinks. Yeah.
And so, and I don't want to try to transport them with their bases on. That's crazy.
Yeah.
High dynamic models like that have that problem.
Yeah.
You see that with some of the Malifaux miniatures where the connection points are so small because the people are doing pirouettes and amazing kung fu high wire fighting. And that's great in a movie and cool in art, but it's a little hard to model in 3D when it has to be something that sits on a base. I'm looking forward to the day when those bases are completely gone and simply replaced with amazing terrain stands.
Yeah.
That's coming for some of these 40K models. It's crazy.
But
I drilled
like Superman, but not a unit.
I drilled a hole into each guy's back and then used green stuff to actually put a small mount so I can put the stand on and off, and it works fine. So that's me. Russ, what about you? Or did you already say?
No, I just finished all my Rune Wars stuff. So it was 2 starter boxes in Command. They're done now. I did all the basing. I was really pleased how it came out. So that is all set. So I was really happy with how fast that came together with the airbrush too. So I was really pleased. What about other geeky goodness, Mac? What about like books, movies, comics, TV? What have you been watching and reading in that area?
Well, I got a weird one for you. I am watching David Mamet's Masterclass.
Oh, what do you think of that?
Oh, that looked great.
He gets a little off course sometimes. I think there was multiple recordings, and they brought him back in to answer questions, but they don't explain that. They don't tell you the questions.
Oh.
So a little. Sometimes you're like, is this the ramblings of a madman? And then he just will drop this piece of genius, like referring to the state. You know how when you're watching a movie, you forget you're there? Yeah. That media state is how it's called. It's what you're trying to achieve when you write a good book or that sort of thing. But he calls it the suspension of the burden of consciousness.
That's cool.
And the way he phrased and he talks about it is you're like, okay, oh wow, that's a really interesting, weird way to look at stuff from the guy who wrote, like stuff that Baldwin makes sound good.
Right. Yeah.
Very cool.
He's
so
awesome.
Yeah, I've been enjoying it, but I guess that's geeky.
Yeah,
but that's
geeky.
more of me trying to transition into novel writing nerddom.
That's awesome. All right. What about you, Craig?
Well, let's see. I'm still reading or listening to, I should say, The Dark Tower. I'm on to Wizard and Glass.
Yep.
And I'm really enjoying it still, although I'm starting. I feel like I feel like the character of well, I don't really want to spoil it for anybody. So
No spoilers.
It's neat going back in time and seeing like him before he became the gunslinger of the original novel.
Yep.
So that was neat.
Well, just don't forget the face of your father, Craig. Just keep that.
I have never forgotten the face of my father,
All right,
Russ, and
good.
yet the world has moved on.
It has.
Watching American Gods, and I want to love it, and I don't know if I do or not, which is a very interesting place to be vis-a-vis a TV show.
May I recommend the audiobook?
I've read the actual book, and I will eventually get the audiobook because I can't remember much at all about the book, but I remember that I enjoyed it.
It's worth it alone for the Coming to America chapters.
Right, exactly. And which are neat parts of the TV show. But there seems to be whole swaths of the TV show that then never get a callback, never get a touchback. So you're like, why did they? And I think they're setting up, I think they're going long game and they're setting up for the next season. And I don't know if the last episode I saw is the last episode of the season or not. That it was like, I'm like, that was one heck of a hanger there. I guess it could end there. I don't know. And because my DVR has for some reason refused to ever find it. So I set it up to record and it never records it. So I have to watch it on demand, which means it doesn't automatically drop on the same night. So I watched it a couple days later. I don't know if I watched it or not. I could go on Google, I'm sure, and find out. But so Ian McShane is still one of my favorite actors. He's fantastic. The guy playing Moon Shadow is awesome. Kristen Chenoweth's character is great. I mean, you'd think like, how are they going to fit Kristen Chenoweth into this universe? And then you're like, oh, that's awesome. She's Easter.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, is she Easter? Oh, that's
she's Easter.
Great casting for Easter.
Yep. And so it's intriguing. And just poring over all the new 40K stuff book-wise other than that. And that's me. What about you?
I've started listening again. My youngest daughter's been blasting through the Dresden Files, and I realized that I tuckered out around book 9, and I just, not that I didn't like it, I just got distracted by something else. And she's been raving about the latest books, and she's like, "Dad, you got to read them. I want to talk to you about it." So I jumped back in. I'm reading Small Favors now, and really enjoying it. I've forgotten how much I enjoyed Dresden, so it's nice to jump back into that universe. Also, I saw Wonder Woman. Now, have you guys seen Wonder Woman yet?
I have not yet seen it.
Mac?
I went to see Pirates of the Caribbean last week on the Tuesday Cheap Movies, and I walked out of it after about 10 minutes and just bought another ticket for Wonder Woman.
Did you really? See, I enjoyed I enjoyed both.
Like, this sucks so much, I'd just rather watch Wonder Woman a second time. I did.
Now, I like Pirates. I like Pirates, but I liked Wonder Woman as well. So you know what you're getting into with Pirates, right?
No,
so,
if you had ever told me I would walk out of a pirate movie,
yeah. See, I think Mac, I
would not believe you.
It's silly. That's the goal of this movie, is to be silly. So I enjoyed it. But Wonder Woman, what'd you think of Wonder Woman?
Loved every second of it. Third act is not as strong as I would like, a little heavy on the CGI, and I felt that it could have been a more of a existential threat, because that kind of shows the development of Wonder Woman as a character into who she becomes as a hero, because this is her origin, and it shows how she gets her power, but it also shows why she becomes a hero. So I would have liked to see that be a little more existential, a little less firefighty, maybe play into the fact that she has to like fly under the radar power-wise and not use them or he'll notice. Like, maybe don't kill him, keep him around. But at the same time, the second act was just – the first and second act are just so good that I don't want to belabor – like, I'm annoyed by the final fight, like, and only in such a minor way. The movie was just, like, so excellent all the way through and funny, and finally someone found a use for Chris Pine.
So we really liked it. My daughters were not that excited to see it, which I was surprised about. They really wanted to see Pirates more. But we went to it and we really enjoyed it right up to the sort of the ballroom scene, which I think is where you would define. I would kind of define where the third act sort of starts. Mac, I'm with you on that.
Yeah, and I would agree.
And we really didn't. The third act kind of just was kind of a letdown. The first two acts were fantastic. I mean, we're like some of the best hero movieing ever done.
Crossing of No Man's Land.
Yes.
Of No Man's Land.
That was awesome. The combat was some of the best superhero combat ever done on screen. The beginning, the fights on Paradise Island or whatever they called it this time around was amazing. I would think the only problem was the third, and it's too bad too, because it could have been wonderful, and I think the third act kind of brought it down to a level of, this is really, really, really good for a DC movie. It's kind of where I ended up. Which is unfortunate, because I really liked a lot about it, and it's got me feeling better, but not super optimistic about Justice League, because I feel like they're going to make those kind of mistakes again, and I'm sad, because Wonder Woman has such potential to be a great, great character.
Well, I feel like the third act doesn't really fall at the feet of the director, simply because it was so CGI heavy, the problems I disliked as much, that it couldn't possibly – there's just so much that a director can't do after the fact once they're already on that kind of CGI stuff. And so moving to a much more like thoughtful you can't really kill War. Yeah, she killed him, but he's back right away.
Spoilers.
He's
Spoiler alert.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Fucking hate. Sorry. Sorry.
But that's okay, Max. So, but I would. There were a couple issues I had. We'll wait a little bit. And I want to talk with us some more, because it is kind of soon to have spoilers in there. But I think it's
been a month.
I know, but Craig hasn't seen it yet.
I haven't seen it.
But what I'm worried about is there was some plot stuff at the end that I was sad about, and I think that's what made it not as good as it could have been. And I think it's where you're going to. But anyway, listeners, watch it, and then we'll do a lost chapter or something on the future about it once Craig finally sees it. But I did really enjoy it. Definitely see it. It's just a fun, great hero movie, no matter how you slice it. So you won't be disappointed. And finally, so I've been watching the new MST3K, the new reboot on Netflix. And it's been okay, but my family and I, we watched, there was an episode, I can't remember what it's called. It's got something but wizards is in the title. and it's basically a really, really bad from 1982 sword and sorcery movie.
Are you talking about Wizards and Aliens?
No.
Oh.
But it's bad, but it's so like there's a giant guy. It's like Star Wars. It's like there's this giant guy in a white rug suit who's supposed to be like this creature, and he's like they keep calling him Fantasy Chewbacca because he kind of looks like that. But it's just like it's so bad. Like we were literally rolling on the floor laughing. My family was. It was so hilarious the way the guys did it up. Really, really great in classic MST3K. One of the funniest things I've seen in a long time. So if you go to Netflix and look up MST3K, find the one about the wizards and just watch it. It is some of the funniest stuff I've seen in forever. So really good stuff. And I think, is that achievements, gentlemen?
I believe that's achievements.
I believe it is.
You can call any of that an achievement.
Exactly. I'm not sure what you're talking about. And now, in an attempt to bring a small amount of dignity and decorum to this otherwise base form of entertainment, and I use the term loosely, I am proud to present... Oh, get on with it. It's time for App of the Ep. Seriously, Wakeland, I used to have my own segment, and now I'm relegating to announcing this pap. Hey, you're lucky we still use you. Hey everyone, time for another App of the Ep. This time around, I know last time I was on, I talked about all the exciting things we saw at the Microsoft event at E3, and I said the next time I did App for the Ep, I was going to talk about the Sony E3 thing because I have a PlayStation 4 also, and now I am console agnostic, meaning I like them both equally. However, unfortunately, we were not super thrilled about the Sony announcement. I thought they could have done a better job this year. Both my daughters and I were unimpressed. And so my mom always said, if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. So we will talk about the Sony announcement. Instead, we'll move right on to another great app that I'm really enjoying. And this one's super good. Just go buy it. So you may remember a while ago, I did an App of the Ep on Monument Valley. It was one of the first ones. And I loved Monument Valley. Such a beautiful game. Elegantly designed, great look and feel, great art direction, very calming, great music, and it's a little puzzler. And if you remember Monument Valley, it's basically this idea that taking an Escher painting, where the perspective is, depending on how you look at the picture, the stairs are going up or they're going down, but it's the same picture. It's kind of like getting through a maze of those in really, really interesting and innovative ways. Monument Valley 2 just came out about a month ago, and I picked it up, and I am loving it. They took all that was great about Monument Valley and just made it that much better, adding a little more story to it, adding a second character, and adding a lot more, even more crazy sort of Escher-like situations that really take it to the next level. And it's just like the people that did this game, these puzzles, it's not that they're really hard. They're really not that hard to get through. And it's not super long, but it's just the thinking going on, the creativity in these puzzles and the creativity in the way the things move around and interact to get you to go through them is really, really clever. Really impressed. And the art direction is so good. I really can't overstate just the simple elegance of Monument Valley and Monument Valley 2. So this is really about Monument Valley 2, but if you never played the original, go do it. They're both, I think, about $4 on the App Store. Well worth that price of a Starbucks coffee. That's my new benchmark for whether an app's worth $5 or not. If I get as much or more enjoyment out of it as a Starbucks, my favorite particular Starbucks coffee is a skinny vanilla latte. So if it's as good as a skinny vanilla latte, it lasts a little longer than that, and it gives me that same little pick-me-up and great sort of feeling of relaxed satisfaction, then that is a good app purchase for me. So again, Monument Valley 2 on iOS. Thank you for listening to another scintillating edition of App of the Ep, a segment in which, hey, less of that, more just getting on with the show. Seriously, Wakeland, you are like school in summer. No class. Hey, welcome back, and of course we've got Mack Martin here on the show, and it's always exciting to talk to Mack about his latest project, and that of course is Conan Rise of Monsters. Now, Mack, it's been a little while since you've been on the show, so thanks again for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
It's been a while. Last time I saw you guys in person was at Adepticon.
Yes.
That was a long
Like,
time
couple
ago.
years
2 or
ago.
3 years ago,
Exactly.
at least. Yeah.
So what have been? Give us some highlights. Give us like the Mack high level sort of what's Mack been up to over the past few years before you got
What's
sort of
the-
into this Conan thing.
The Mack Martin Glory Tour. Where
Right,
you been?
exactly.
What you been doing?
Right.
You know, I've just been designing stuff. Like, I've
Living the
been
dream.
doing. Yeah, the people forget that a lot of game design happens like movies get made, and so a lot of times you're working and you're getting paid, but nothing you have like sees the light of day because it gets shelved or it gets changed or projects get scrapped, and or sometimes they just want to see a treatment of something, so you do it because they pay, So sometimes you just kind of work for a couple years and nothing comes out.
Right. So as long as you're getting the check, that's what matters. So
Right.
So that's great. So how did you go from a bunch of these little projects? Did you think Conan was going to be another one of these little projects that may or may not happen, or did you kind of have good feelings about it? How did you get involved in that?
No, Conan was was going to happen whether or not I did anything on it or not. I did what's called a development pass. Mm-hmm. I rewrote the rules, handed that over to him, showed him, played with a few things, tried to add a few things, figured out, tested, just genuinely developed it, tried to see where I could break it, what needed to be done, and then they, Shane Hensley took it back over and ran it down to the goalpost.
I think this is fascinating. So a lot of people probably don't know how someone like you gets brought into this situation, like someone who goes through the rules and kind of refines them. So are the rules largely done by the time you see them, or are they just high level concepts? How does this sort of happen?
In this case, there were 3 or 4 versions of the rules already, and there was a lot of little things like, well, we wanted to do this, and we haven't rewritten that. So we just I took all of the current, what was supposed to be, and wrote a version, and then I took here's what I would do, do we want to try this? And I just, threw a bunch of stuff. But yeah, they were largely been play tested for a couple years, and they were originally by Jack Emmert, the guy who, famously NCSoft's City of Heroes.
Right.
So these weren't a rule set that really needed someone to come in and go, everything is wrong.
Right.
Right.
That's cool. So when you saw them, were you ooh, there's something what kind of what got you engaged with Conan? Was it a gig, or was it like, oh my God, how did you feel about Conan going into this? Have you always been a lifelong Conan fan?
I've always been a Conan – well, I shouldn't say a lifelong Conan fan, but I've certainly been a Conan fan since I discovered the novels in my granddad's house. Ooh. He had James Bond and Conan, and I read everything he had. Now, it doesn't mean I've read everything Conan. It's like 6 or 7 books. I loved every page of them, right? And then and when I got the project, I went back and I read a bunch of the old short stories. Mm-hmm. Those original, and those are always fun. It's always kind of weird to look back at how things were written, because let's be honest, it's Conan. It's a product of its times.
Right.
This is a shirtless man hacking things in half with a sword.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's great. Well, so that's cool. So you got some of the original source material of Conan, right? That was your first introduction. It wasn't even the Arnold Schwarzenegger movies. You were back in the books back in the day.
No, I remember having some drag down arguments with my friends. I liked the Momo version. I'm it felt like the books. He was a pirate.
Right.
He's a corsair. Right. Did everyone miss that? He's a corsair.
Right. So what's the elevator pitch for the game? So when you started seeing the game, and of course you had this fond nostalgia for the books. Did you see the books in the game? Is that kind of where you were looking at it from?
For me, what was cool is that it kind of pushes past it pushes past the timeline that was established by Howard. Mm-hmm. It imagines the Conan, the Rise of Monsters age, which is when Thothamon and Conan's Circle of Iron actually kind of come to a head, where the books are written in a time when that hasn't happened and isn't happening. Mm-hmm. Thothamon is much more of a behind the scenes problem, and he's also a villain in other stuff. It's a whole thing, right? So to see that kind of just imagined coming to a head was really fun for me, but also to see the characters play like I imagined them, right? Thothamon is very tricky to play, but when you use him right, your opponent doesn't see what he's doing coming, right? They never know what. So the cards that he has at his disposal, not to get too into mechanics at this point, I'm a mechanics guy. So the cards he has, you can never tell what your opponent is doing until you see his cards, because his cards are so flexible but so sneaky at the same time. It's very like, oh crap, is he trying to lure me in, or am I screwed if I stay out here? Right? Like, he's got a card for both, and you don't know which one he's got, and he kind of tries to bluff you. It's great.
That's cool. So as you started to look into the mechanics and start thinking about how it was going to work, what were there elements of the game you're like, wow, this is really different? What kind of called to you from a you've obviously done lots of different mechanics for lots of different games. What did you see in there that you were like, ooh, this is going to be interesting to refine and then watch people get into?
Well, it's not the first miniatures game to bring a deck to the table. Obviously, people have used decks for random generation as well as, having random effects and that sort of thing. But I've long wanted to see a game that brought each player choosing a deck to play. And with miniatures games, you can't just expect the players to build a deck. That's not how they interact with miniatures games. But having maybe 3 or 4 pre-built decks they can pick from kind of works. And seeing that in Conan, especially when, there's Conan is, a thief, a barbarian, a king, and all those things. And to see Thothamon have some choices, and then to see decks in play. Oops, sorry about that.
That's all right.
To see decks in play that. Jeez, people. To see, couldn't get the sound down fast enough, apparently. To see decks in play that work that way was really exciting for me. I have a gag, or a gag, really, a funny thing where I and Monty Cook both kind of did the same thing with our games, where we took the GM rolling away at exactly the same time. Right. And I've written 3 or 4 miniatures games, and I keep trying to put this kind of deck system in. And then I'm shown, here's Jack Emirates, and I'm like, yeah, this is exactly what I've been trying to get done. Great.
That's cool.
It was really nice to see someone who's kind of innovating in the ways that I've been hoping to see happen.
Uh-huh.
Oh, cool. So give us the elevator pitch. So what is sort of the overall pitch of Conan Rise of Monsters?
Well, my thoughts on it might be different than the official line. Right. So the Mack Martin view, just me, is I like to think of it as a miniatures game for 2. Okay. I thought I turned that down.
You're a very active evening tonight, Mac.
Well, it's funny. I do actually have a lasagna in the oven.
Well, that's important.
Because I've got people coming over after this, and we're going to be playing some Ars Magica.
There you go. We got
But anyway, so the elevator pitch, I like to think of it as a miniatures game for 2 in the box.
Okay.
You open it up. My fiance described the miniatures when she first saw them as painted. They weren't pre-painted. They were painted, and if you want to add detail, they're ready for it, like X-Wing miniatures.
Okay.
And I also personally just kind of hate pre-painted. They're not pre-painted. There's unpainted and painted.
Right.
Pre-painted is before paint. That's what that means. It means there's no paint on it.
Pre-painted is prime.
Yeah, that's prime. Correct. Okay. So anyway, but they are painted, and to be, I know I'm biased, but these are some of the best pre-paints I've seen.
Nice.
These are not just kind of slapped paint on there. Yeah, they're using stenciling and stuff to do some of the cool work, but you can tell they're doing dry brushing, washes. They're doing the proper steps that a moderate painter will see it and know that they've done a good job and be able to build on it or be happy to play with it.
Right. That's awesome. I actually didn't, I didn't read deep enough in the Kickstarter. I didn't even catch that they were pre-painted. That's awesome. So all the pictures on here are these the production?
That's what you get.
Pre-paint quality. Well, that's awesome. Those are really nice.
Yeah, that's the production. Yeah, that's the production. Yeah.
Very cool.
Well, I don't know when this goes live. I should have asked before we started. But the Kickstarter is doing great. It took, an hour and a half, 2 hours to fund. Now there's 19 days to go as of this recording, and they've already double funded. So I can't imagine this is going to do anything but just really do great.
This episode will be coming out just as the Kickstarter's got only a couple days left. So if you're hearing this and OMG, I gotta have Conan, then just go right to Kickstarter. Just pause the podcast, go right to Kickstarter.
Don't wait.
Back it.
Normally
then
we don't give you that advice.
No, but in this case, you're going to want to, and it's totally funded already, so this thing is going to be big. It's already doing great.
I'm looking at the list. I'm looking at the list here. They've added their terrain boards, the cardboard terrain boards, which are really cool. Then they've added, we've got new unit cards, and it looks like we're coming up on all the new fate cards soon.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So
yeah,
how
more
does-
decks, just great.
So how do the decks work? So obviously you think that's like the core of the game. What are the decks I'm choosing from? Is this my army? Is this the powers of the army? What are those things?
Well, it's the flavor of the army.
Okay.
It's not necessarily the commander, but for instance, if you're playing the Circle of Iron, many of them are, you've got a I don't know what their final names were, but let's say you have a barbarian deck. That one is very, themed towards doing barbarous things. You'll see Conan acting like a barbarian as opposed to saying.
What is a barbarous thing to you, Mac?
I would say anytime you use the word hewn or a twain, you've hit barbarous.
Oh, a twain. There
A
we go.
twain. Well played, sir.
Cleave.
Hey,
there's-
I've been
there's
reading a
sometimes
lot
cleave.
of look. I love Howard, Robert E. Howard, the Conan books. That is a man who owns more than one thesaurus, and he's not afraid to find just exactly the right word to tell you exactly what's happening.
Anybody who can make the word lamentations one of the most quoted quotes in gaming history has to be doing something right.
We wouldn't even have it we wouldn't have Lamentations anywhere outside the Bible if it wasn't for Conan.
Right, exactly. That is awesome. So really the decks are adding. So are they dictating what models are in my force, or are they dictating the kind of skills?
Not at all. They'll function with basically whatever models you bring.
Okay.
And depending on the play style you're using, you might pick them at different times. In a campaign you might try and use one. Or you might switch. It depends on what you're playing. But for the most part, the idea is you pick them when you have an idea of what you're seeing.
Oh, very cool. And what were some of the design goals around the decks? Was it really a new flavor on miniature gaming, or was there something like this really captures what Conan is?
It was more the surprise. So Conan, the Conan Rise of Monsters miniatures game has two main resources. As I get into mechanics spiel here.
Yeah.
Destiny is one big one. That's what it was. It might be command pool now. I don't remember. I should have looked at the rules before we recorded. But it's basically a pool of points that are effectively dice. And most people are familiar with this kind of system. You get X number of points and you spend them throughout the round, and you get them back every round. And they're just dice to throw into basically any check you're going to make. So maintaining that is really important, and your opponent can very easily watch how many of those points you have. So striking when you know they don't have a lot to throw into defense and that sort of thing are really important. The cards, on the other hand, are there to let you react to that and to kind of surprise your opponent, because you never know what those cards say. Right? So there's one resource that you can watch your opponent manage, and then the other one you're like, well, how many cards he got left? That's all you can know.
Okay.
And what those effects are so much more wild than adding a dice.
And so when do the cards come in? Is like maybe we should get into the mechanics then, because I'm just going to keep asking about these cards.
You draw 3 on turn 1, 2 or 3 on turn 1, depending on the scenario, and 1 a turn from there, sometimes more depending on the scenario, and that's just it. Like, you're going to get a couple, and you're going to throw 1 into your hand every turn.
Got it.
And then that way there's just always kind of something you might be able to do that's a little crazy. And those are things like, you know what, this guy's just going to add a bunch of dice to this kind of check, or I'm going to reroll all my sigils, or hey, my blade is poisoned, and every sigil result now does an unstoppable wound. Things like that.
I get it. So it's not just like a once per turn card phase thing. They pop in all throughout at various points in the game, depending on what the card does.
They're very reactionary.
Oh, cool. Okay, very cool.
Yeah, I believe the card. They'll tell you when each card will tell you when it can be used. That sort of thing. There's obviously rules for resolving all the timing, but.
So before we get to the mechanics, I wanted to ask a little bit about the two factions. So right. What were you thinking the essence of both factions were? Like how did you want to kind of differentiate them?
Oh, well, that was not my task. That was well done before I was. Yeah, it was Shane and Jack had a very, very clear vision that Thothamon was supposed to have a little more range, but more than that, feel like he was like the sorcerer was the most important piece, and that he was doing a lot on the table while his men kind of crumpled. That way, the Circle of Iron feels a little more heroic. Yeah, guys are dying, but they're clearly pushing in. And a lot of the game kind of happens at the center line. It's not a huge board. Ranges aren't really, really big.
Right.
So it's very easy to get into that charge range. So there's not a lot of places to fall away. And you kind of – the Circle of Iron, I don't want to say it's more difficult to play, but let's pretend, for instance, that you've got a father and son playing, which is what we saw a lot of testing doing.
Mm-hmm.
The father and son group, dad usually takes, like, for instance, he takes Set, and he gets to play all that fun, like the villain, and he gets to ham it up. So there's almost an active role playing to it. That was kind of their biggest goal.
Oh, cool.
And that the player playing Conan got to take those big risks, and that felt adventurous because Conan at its heart is pulp. It's an adventure.
Right.
Yes, it's an adventure in, a very dark, bloody world, but it's an adventure.
Nice. And one thing I also noticed was that you went for, or they went for, or the team went for, a variety. So I love the idea that the models come with color on them, for lack of a better term. They look great. But also, there's different kinds of units in the game, right? So right out of that starter box, you're going to have, or the core game, you're going to have units, solos, and sort of large creatures. Is that right?
Yeah. The initial, like just that core box, that core setup, has the heroes, obviously the single hero models, Conan and Thoth, 3-man elite units, guys on horses, archers, skeletons, and then of course each side gets a big monster. Thothmon gets the serpent, the giant fang of the something of Set, and then of course there's the elephant on over on the Circle of Iron.
Right. Yeah. Very cool. So, great. Well, I think we should get into the mechanics, right, Craig? Or do you have any other questions?
No, I like it. It's
cool. It does sound neat.
The Scion of Set is what you're
Scion of Set.
Scion of Set. Yes, thank you. Scion of Set.
Alliteration. So let's start with, one thing a lot of miniature gamers get into is list creation. How did you guys go to a lot of, how are they thinking about building army lists? Is that a pretty straightforward process? Has it got a lot of depth to it? What was the angle on this, on Conan?
Straightforward point system. Units cost points. You're playing usually to about 20 points. Every card will have points so that they can, as things go forward, do like elite units. I think we already hit those points where there's extra cards in there to do elite versions of the units you've got, or recruit versions. Like there's a lot of opportunities moving forward for cards. Like building new units out of the models you have is real easy just by creating new cards.
Oh, very cool. All right.
So currently they've got the base, and they're adding to their number of what units do and how you can use them.
And I think what you solved too with the card decks, it sounds like a little bit is, I'm a big fan of a lot of variety in my games. So and usually in my mind that manifests itself as many factions, right? But of course Conan, there's these two primary factions in the universe. So the way you tackle that was, it's always the two same sides, but by picking different decks, you're going to change the flavor and playstyle of the armies.
Exactly. Well, and Conan's got a lot of room for more factions. I mean, there are a bunch of Corsairs.
Right.
There's pirates.
Yep.
There's all kinds of stuff. But no, when you've got basically the forces of, I don't want to call them, light and darkness because it's Conan. It's more like, crimson and darkness. But
right.
But it's when you've got two main factions like that, it can be hard to differentiate them. I have a theory, and I think you guys share that with me, is a game doesn't really function until it has at least 3 to 5 factions when you're looking at something like this. But being able to say that this half has both, has necromancy and sorcery and thaumaturgy and this, and you just keep breaking out different ways to say magic and building new decks, right?
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, it's the
same thing with Conan.
Yeah, it's the Flames of War trick, right? You really only have two sides, but you have different armies from different theaters and a lot more variety, and all of a sudden you have variety, But you're right, I agree. You need that feeling of at least 3 or 4. I like the magic number for me is 4. If I can get 4 factions in a game or reasonable facsimiles thereof, I feel like you got something that has enough variety for people to get excited.
My magic number is 5, 5 or no factions at all.
Oh, 5 or none.
Oh.
So
the no factions at all is a weird one to do.
So how do you rank Conan then? Do you count the different decks as factions? So you have 5, or what do you think about that?
I think that Conan is a game that is going to come into its own as we see more stuff.
Got it.
It is it is starting off the bat real good. The rules are clean. They feel right. They're exciting. They're fun. They're not overly complicated. If you're new to miniatures, you can play them. If you're an old hand, you'll see how they work. Everything will be very intuitive, and you'll be using strategies, right? Because the missions are always what makes a miniatures game complex. Your opponent is what provides the difficulty, not the complexity of the game.
Right.
We see that in X-Wing all the time.
Right.
We see that in all, we see that over and over. We see that with the new 40K. So I think by having a solid, well-crafted core that is easy to add to for years to come, I think that's what we need to look at when we look at a new game. And to see so many units right off the bat is very, very telling of how easy it will be to expand this game in a way that doesn't lend itself to rules bloat.
Yeah, I think that's right.
That's the hard part, is fighting rules bloat.
Yep. Good stuff. So how about missions? You mentioned earlier, or scenarios, right? You mentioned earlier that the Conan side in particular, you want to be able to try daring things and do daring deeds. It seems to me that to really capture that heroism, you're going to need some kind of objective besides kill the other guys. How did you guys handle that, or how was that handled in the game?
So there's the main way to play this game, in my mind, is the scenarios, and that is I believe they've got a separate scenario deck coming, or a scenario book coming. That's on the it's on the stretch goals, I believe, or it's a big upgrade. As I scroll through to see what they finally decided to do, I believe it's one of the. I believe it's a stretch goal.
There's a campaign book. I see the campaign book.
That's the one.
Yep, there you go.
Okay. Yeah, the campaign book is, to me, the coolest way to play the game, because missions segue into missions. Things happen. I'm not certain what mechanics are in there now, but there's all kinds of things that, you guys can think of 1,000 things you can do in there. Changing decks, swapping things around. Certain units become available. Here's this unit's stats that are totally different for this mission. There's just so much you can do. And because they chain together and tell a very Howardian, I'm making up a word there, Robert E. Howard-esque story, that's how I like to, there's something about an almost a historical gaming aspect to it because of how closely it hits that feel.
Right.
But at the same time, it's still fantasy. So I get to get that historical nerd thing for something that never happened.
Right. Yeah. Very cool.
It's the same thing that feels to me about 40K.
Yeah, that's very cool. Right, exactly, and that's really
technically 40K just hasn't happened.
Right. Yet.
It's all perspective. So Matt, give us the high level sort of overview of this game from a mechanics point of view. Like, how does the turn sequence work? Is this integrated turns? You go, I go? Like, what's the feel of the game?
It's definitely alternating activations. You start off by each player drawing a card. Then you roll initiative, which is based on your destiny pool. You roll as many of those dice as you have, destiny or command, whatever it ended up being. Those don't go down as you lose units, but you get one of them per guy you have. And then some of if you've got bonus from the unit, if it dies, then it'll go away. But so on some of the rules. But most of the time, if you've got 5 units, you'll have 5 destiny pool, right?
Right.
And you roll those 5 dice. Whoever gets the most swords, dice have 3 symbols on them: swords, shields, sigils. Sigils are weird. Sword or damage. Shields are blocking.
Right.
And this isn't, I'm able to go through the whole rules real quick.
Nice.
So you roll those dice, decide who's going first, and then that person just activates a unit. You swap off and on until everyone's activated. There's a quick cleanup phase. You go again.
Nice. And so the activation is everything. The unit moves, attacks, and then it's done, and then the next guy does his thing.
Correct. There's some cards that you'll want to do at the end of the turn and that sort of thing. But for the most part, the game is about jockeying for position and activating your models.
Is there any morale rules, or is Conan pretty much never run?
Oh, there's morale rule. Oh, definitely. If you lose, I forget how many, but there is a morale check. It's not actually very easy to fail. You roll 2 dice, and as long as you get A swords, you pass.
Okay.
There's a sword on 3 sides, a shield on 2 sides, and a sigil on 1.
Very cool. Nice. It sounds.
Sigil is
go ahead.
Always things like, this guy's really good with an axe. If he rolls a sigil on an attack, he deals a damage.
Right. So sigils power the special abilities, right? Which is
correct.
Very cool. I like that a lot too. So it's sort of like the surges and descent, right? You can use this for whatever. That's neat. I like that a lot.
Yeah, it's very similar to that. Yeah.
Oh,
you generate them and they have an effect during rolls.
I like it. So it gives you a very simple, elegant set of mechanics, but then now when you're translating those sigils to whatever they do, does each unit have its own card, a la Malifaux and War Machine, so you know all its special
every unit? Absolutely, yeah. Every unit has its own card, and the card will list its sigil effect. So, one version of Conan, for instance, had every sigil counts as a success for Conan. So his dice are just better, right? Like he just basically has 4 successes on attacks and 3 successes on defense.
Nice.
But some guys who have armor simply say, "Oh, their sigils count as shields." Well, that doesn't matter on an attack, but it does on defense.
Uh-huh.
Sounds like it's a great, simple pick up and play game, and
very versatile.
I can see why it appeals to family gaming between parents and their kids.
It's also great for board gamers who like miniatures games and want to try it, but don't want to put together a bunch of stuff. And this goes away in a box. Mm-hmm. You can put it and you can bring it back out and play it. Play like 3 or 4 games like it's a board game instead of playing it like it's a miniatures game too, which you can do with games like X-Wing or even Malifaux, but something like Conan that's so narrative driven, that's a little easier to do.
Yeah, the guys over at Steamforge, Guild Ball guys, they coined a phrase that I like a lot, which is, does the box pass the Christmas morning test? So if you open up the Conan box on Christmas morning, does it have everything you need to play, or do you got to go find a tape measure? I mean, do you have everything you need to play right out of the box?
You'll need a tape measure.
Okay. So almost.
They don't have a tape measure in the box, to my knowledge. I think that was just the assumption is you'd have one. But no range is over 18 inches that nice. I know of. So you don't need a huge tape measure.
Right.
And you might even be able to get away with like a ruler you have sitting around.
That's why GW did the red wibbly stick, although they're not really Christmas morning test passing either, unfortunately.
You could snap those together. Back in the day.
Yeah, you could.
Together.
Yeah. Great. Well, it sounds very.
No.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, it sounds very easy to get into, though. It sounds like it's super expandable. What are some beyond the cards? Was there anything else that you were like really sort of like, man, this game really brought this together in a way? Like, what gets you excited about it, about the game beyond the mechanics, everything you did?
Oh man, I think I run out of things to be excited about.
So much. Well, maybe the Kickstarter. So, how excited were you when the Kickstarter back so quickly?
Very, very. It's just really like nice to see that other people still love Conan as much as I do, and that that Kickstarter is still a place that miniatures games thrive. As a guy who wants one day to build another miniatures game just for fun, being able to go to Kickstarter, maybe if you have just 3D sculpts, is a big deal. Now, it's nice that a game like Conan can show off the prototypes and it's like, we're ready to go, we're ready to manufacture. This is Shane Hensley. This is Savage Worlds. This is Deadlands. These are not guys who haven't made products before.
Right.
So it's that's always something I'm nervous about with Kickstarter when I back things, so I can understand why other people are. So it's really nice to me to see people in the industry who I respect so much so excited about the same kind of products I'm excited to see. That means that, heaven forbid, I leave the industry. And that, like this novel stupid thing I'm doing works out. But like, heaven forbid, it means that cool games will keep coming and that I don't have to make them. Because, I worry I'm the only one who makes cool games.
Right. Well, that is a thing, Max, so we got to watch that. It's very important. It is cool, but it's great to see that these, it is great to see that, I think just lets people try some crazy stuff. Like, it'd be really hard for guys who create, like a role-playing game or a video game to just jump over and make a miniature game in a box without Kickstarter to make it sort of like, well, this is a crazy idea to do a Conan thing. Let's see if it'll work. And then, sure enough,
miniatures are expensive.
They are, yeah.
You got to pay for so much stuff up front, from molds, plastics, manufacturing time, shipping. Just the list goes on, right? We've all talked about that, but like it's so expensive to start a miniatures game. Blows my mind that it can even happen today with crowdsourcing or crowdfunding.
That is amazing.
Right.
Very cool. Well, Craig, do you have any questions for Mac? I'm excited about this. For some reason I didn't know I almost said pre-paint again. I didn't know they came painted. That is awesome.
Yeah. No, I mean, Mac, do you know of any, is there any discussion about other factions or?
I'm just not at liberty to say. Of course, there's discussion about what to do. Look,
that's all I'm asking. The plans are there. People are talking. That's all I'm asking.
But look. At the end of the day, this thing is made by a company. If this Kickstarter goes bananas and makes $1 billion, they ain't gonna ignore that.
Right. Right.
Right now, it's clipping right along. I expect to see cool Conan stuff for a long time because it's real easy to produce, new stuff. It's really easy to heck. I'm hoping to see it get enough traction that there's a fan base of players making new adventures and stories and print and play cards on their own, right? This is the sort of game that it's easy enough to design for. They don't feel like you're being unfair building something with your friend, right? It's one of those games that's easy to do that for. Yeah.
And I think the non-random painted models thing is kind of a big deal. So even if I know everyone's going to play this for the rules, of course, Mac, because they sound awesome.
Because it's the only reason you play miniatures games.
But there's you're getting a pretty good value here of some pre-painted. I said pre-painted again. Painted models. I'm going to break myself of that habit, Mac, because now that you brought that up, I hate the term also.
That's my pet peeve.
No, but I'm with you now. I never thought of it that way before, but now I'm like, you're totally right. That's a terrible phrase. So
there's a comedian who does a bit about unsweetened tea, and I'm totally with him. You don't take sugar out. It's not unsweetened.
Right. Yes, exactly.
It's tea and sweetened tea.
Right. Sugar added and not. So yeah, but I can see people wanting these models just for, role players wanting them for their collection, or Conan fans wanting the models for the collection, or anybody who plays any other miniature games just wanting them as part of, flesh out their factions, whatever.
I hadn't even thought about that. Just the fact that you get 5 cool skeletons if you run D&D.
Right.
Suddenly, every one of these models is totally usable in every D&D campaign because Conan is one of the templates from which Dungeons and Dragon was hewed.
Right.
Yep. Ooh, hewn. Somebody's being barbarous. Someone is being barbarous.
In the comedy game, that's what's known as a callback.
That's a callback. That's right. Well played, Mac. Well, Mac, thanks for all the detail on the game. I'm super excited about it, and thanks for bringing it on the radar for our listeners here. It's obviously already on a lot of folks' radars because this thing is kicking butt. So if you want to,
I got to go watch a movie now.
Yeah. Plus, I got to go watch Conan now. I know what I'm watching on Netflix tonight. Well, Mac, thanks for sharing with us. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to hear from Total Fangirl and some other stuff, and then when we come back, we'll be talking to Mac about miniature war game mechanics in general and what the heck's going on with those lately.
What is going on lately with the miniatures war? What's going on with the miniatures war games?
Don't do Seinfeld.
No. What's with that?
This is Total Fangirl. Regular Jane most days, Total Fangirl when the moment strikes. Han shot first. Starbuck is a guy. And Lestat, now there's a vampire. Hey everyone, this is Nicole, your Total Fangirl. You can follow me on Twitter at Nicole Wakelin and check out my blog, TotalFangirl.com. Our shout out is to all of our wonderful supporters over at Patreon. Head to patreon.com/the D6 Generation and you too can support the show. So this is possibly one of the most awkwardly recorded segments I've ever had because last night Russ recorded the whole show and he broke the microphone. So we have this giant microphone and instead of a stand, I'm trying to hold it in front of my mouth and not keep moving the distance and accidentally talking with my hands. I feel like some old timey newscaster covering an event with those giant microphones. This is very odd, people. Russ, fix the microphone. We can't keep doing this. This is ridiculous. Anyhow, so Russ and I have been watching a show and he hasn't been busy breaking our fancy recording equipment. We've been watching the original Twin Peaks. Now, I never saw the series when it first came out because I was in college and I was working full time and I was very, very busy and didn't have time for it. So I didn't see it. And now they're doing the revival. I don't know, the next episode. I haven't seen it yet. We are actually this minute watching the final episode. If Russ can manage to stay awake and not fall asleep because he had a really late couple of nights back from flying on business and then recording the show, we'll actually finish watching it tonight. And then we're going to start watching, I guess we have the movie and then the new episode. So I finally feel like I got a chance to see something that was all sorts of hype and excitement and everybody knew everything about it. And there's all sorts of pop culture references that I never quite got because I didn't get a chance to see it. I did at the time, however, have a boss who was super, super into it. And she got on a kick where she was bringing strong black coffee and donuts into work constantly. It was more than the morning after the show. It was like always. Diane's like, I need to bring in coffee and donuts because Agent Cooper would have coffee and donuts. I believe there was even once cherry pie, if I'm correct. So I've been watching Twin Peaks and thinking, okay, is all this fuss, was it cool? And surprisingly, although oddly hokey in a way, which is slightly due to the fact that it came out in the early 90s, it still holds up pretty well. It's still really weird, and it feels very, pre-X-Files. Like this is what you're going to get with the X-Files. This is what this kind of stuff is going to be. And I'm sad that they didn't make more episodes of it back in the day, because I would have loved to have seen that. But now I'm in the finale. I'm watching the finale, and I'm told that I have to, since I have managed to watch all 9 zillion episodes, what is it, 8 the first season, 20 something the second season of the original, that I have to watch this movie, Fire Walk With Me, I think it's called. So I'm going to watch the movie, and then I'm going to watch the new series. But I've been like religiously avoiding seeing anything about the new Twin Peaks, because I don't want it to be spoiled, because not only would it spoil what it's about to come, but it would have even just spoiled what had happened, 20 some odd years ago, because I hadn't seen any of it. But now the big challenge is we're about to go on a vacation. And when we go on vacation, we aren't sitting in a hotel room watching, Netflix. And so now I'm disappointed. I'm going to have to wait a couple of weeks before I can find out what happened. And I'm curious if there's anybody out there who watched the original and then watched the new one. And what did you think? Did it carry on the story? Is it exciting? Should I be excited about it? Do you feel like it lived up to your donut and coffee and cherry pie expectations? Because hopefully by the time the summer's over, I will have finally watched all of Twin Peaks.
Hey, and now it's time to talk our friends in Canada. Our friends in Canada, about Terrace, really, let's be honest. Terrace at Geek Nation
our friend
Tours.
who goes around the world.
He really does.
He's a citizen of the world.
He is a citizen Canadian who travels the world, making sure you have the best tour possible. Now, Craig, I don't know if you know this about Nicole and I, but we are huge Doctor Who fans. It's a thing.
I did know that, yes.
And Terrace has just announced an awesome new tour over there at Geek Nation Tours called the Who's Your Doctor 2017 tour. Have you seen this thing?
I have. It looks awesome.
Looks awesome. You get to go see the TARDIS. Now, I had the opportunity, nay honor, nay privilege, whilst I was visiting Wales, with our friend Owen. He took us to Cardiff, and we got to see the Doctor Who experience in Cardiff, where, of course, is where Torchwood is based. Obviously, everybody knows this.
Yep.
And, of course, that's part of the Geek Nation tour. You get to go to Cardiff Bay, which is a beautiful, beautiful city, beautiful area. The Doctor Who experience there is amazing. But this tour goes beyond just that.
And it's closing soon.
Yes, so you got to go see that. But this tour goes.
This is your chance to see it before it closes.
Yeah, definitely. Don't miss out. But this tour goes way beyond that. I mean, there'll be fezzes. There'll be all the different great locations that Doctor Who is filmed in. I mean, really amazing stuff. And so if you have been looking for a good excuse to go to some of the most beautiful places in the UK and experience all that in the way only Doctor Who could be experienced, you definitely want to go check that out. But, let's say Doctor Who's not your thing. Don't worry. That's the magic of Geek Nation Tours, right? Okay, go to geeknationtours.com. Click that tours link, the left-hand corner, and you will see tours for just about everything you can imagine. Whether it's Gen Con's already closed, so that's filled up. So thank you for everyone who jumped into the Gen Con tour. We'll see you guys at Gen Con. That'll be awesome. Yep. But if your thing is Star Trek, they got a tour for that. If your thing is Harry Potter, you got a tour for that. If your thing is if you always wanted to go to Spiel in Germany, got a thing for that. Want to go to Japan? That's in there. How about the Game of Thrones tour? No problem. I mean, it's all in there. You cannot get a better selection of super nerdy things to go. And the best part is you go in with a bunch of your friends, who are a bunch of folks maybe you never met, but the good part is they will be your friends because they all have the same interests as you do. They'll be talking about their favorite 40K army on the bus or whatever they play. You'll be talking about board games with them, and you'll be experiencing all these great times with folks you'll feel right at home with because they're all your people sharing your interest on a tour about the things you all love together. So that's what makes Geek Nation Tours so special.
Yeah, it's an awesome way to see the world.
It sure is. So check it all out at geeknationtours.com.
Ta-da!
You're listening to the Dice Tower Network at Dicetowernetwork.com. More fun than Merchant of Venus. Wait, what?
Who writes these?
Hey, everybody, welcome back. And of course, as you know, Mack has been central to so many of these different miniatures games and games of other types over the last 10 years that we thought, well, there's a lot changing. There's a lot going on in various metas around the gaming community. And we've been meaning to have a conversation about, we wanted to do one of Russ's mulling mechanics, but this actually, the scope of this is so wider that we wanted to bring on somebody who was, had a really firm grasp of design, and Mack is perfect for that. So Mack, we're going to talk about miniature gaming trends in 2017. How's that sound?
Woo!
He's excited.
Does it
He's
get more excited than that, people? It does not. Let's be honest.
It does not.
So go ahead, Craig.
The little girl from the first Despicable Me.
That's right, just like her.
So what's going on with these games? What's going on with these games?
Well, I thought it'd be fun to talk about, like, what kind of rules are we seeing more and more, and kind of in the context of, a lot of times we'll say things like, it doesn't feel like a modern miniature game. And what the heck does that mean, right? Like, what is a 2017 modern? What are some things we're seeing in rules? Mack, do you want to start us off? What's something you're starting to see in a lot of miniature games? You're feeling like, yeah, this is sort of, they're all doing this now, or things that are really being innovative, you think?
Well, I think we're seeing everyone kind of move out to using more of the traditional board game fare in their miniatures games. We moved away from it when miniatures games and I should say miniatures tactical games were much more focused on chits and boards and that sort of thing. And as we've moved towards miniatures and that kind of that more, the more and more cinematic we've gotten over the decades, literally, wargaming has moved, I think, more towards that embracement of all things tabletop. So we're seeing a lot more cardboard components. We're seeing a lot more card and plastic components that aren't necessarily miniatures, but that are designed to make playing the game easier. Kind of more back towards not the full like Car Wars templates kind of stuff, but we're definitely seeing different options between dice and miniatures.
Yeah, well, you definitely see the template thing happening a lot. If you look at especially the Fantasy Flight stuff, right? I mean, you get X-Wing, Armada, Rune Wars; those are all template driven.
But then at the same time, you see the big templates come out of games like
that's true. Yeah.
40K.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the area of effect templates are going away. Yeah, that's a good point.
But interestingly, then you look at Warlord, right?
Yep.
And you look at Bolt Action. They just added in templates.
Yes, that's true.
So are they like behind the curve, or are they like going to jump into that hole and go, well, people who really need templates as their primary number one mechanic are going to jump on our game now?
I have mixed feelings on the death of the template, though. So here's the thing: there's something. I don't think templates have died. I think GW is pioneering not using them, which is interesting. But I think there's something, and Mack, I'm interested in your thoughts on this. There is some mechanics that flare your imagination and getting you imagining what's happening, the thing you're emulating on an actual battlefield on the tabletop are cool. And I think when you lay down like a flamer template, or you lay down a big pie plate because it's where a shell's hitting or where a grenade's going off or where a magic spell is hitting, I do think there's something sort of visceral about that. Sort of like, you were immediately, you almost can't do it without going, or something. So I do think there's something there.
There's certainly a fun to it, but every mechanical choice you make has a flaw to it. And sometimes you forget, or you've been designing around those flaws for so long that you forget what your game can do without those mechanics. Yeah. So I think it's really important for us to not dismiss templates. They work great in lots of games, but it's important to see a company like GW try it without them. Yeah. Because I think what the designers at GW are going to find is like, oh yeah, they only do certain things. They're not a sacred cow that our game has to have. As a matter of fact, I feel like we mentioned the Lehman Russ earlier. I think the Lehman Russ is going to have its comeback because it's now broken away from that template. And so there's a game like with like 40K where those templates were holding certain units back and you couldn't really tell. You didn't know because templates really never do anything but destroy troops, even when they're anti-vehicle. Because a template has a bigger chance to scatter off than a 2+ or even a 3+ attack.
Yeah. Well, I agree. And I think also templates take longer to resolve, right? So there's the game balance with, am I making the game faster to play, or maybe a little more visceral, right? So there's that back and forth. So I think it's really interesting. I think it's nice that they're trying that. We are seeing a trend to go away from scatter, regardless. Most games now don't scatter. They use a different mechanic. So they might have a template, but it's a random number of troops in the template that are hit. Or they might have a template and they just let everybody under it get hit, but there's no movement on the. Or you might roll to hit, and if you hit, use a template. If you miss, there's no template, right? They are moving away from the scatter mechanic. I think mostly because it slows the game down. I think. Right.
Well, also we're having problems. There's a balance issue that comes out.
Right.
One of the big problems when you're balancing over time, especially with a miniatures game like this, is you've got power creep, but more destructive. What you don't notice is slow play on only specific units,
right.
and that units aren't fulfilling their fantasy.
Right.
A great example I feel of a vehicle that does not fulfill its fantasy well is the Whirlwind, simply because it is obviously an anti-air vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so it doesn't fulfill that primary fantasy. So you see it don't get taken. It doesn't sell. Now they've spent money on a kit that isn't moving. That's all kinds of problems. So by moving to this quote unquote more modern approach, which for me, the definition is focused on player experience.
That's fair.
When you move to that modern approach, as opposed to the simulation, this is those kind of those hiccups you're going to see, especially with a company transitioning like GW.
I think it's a great point, Mac. I love your statement there that you're moving. I would say in the late 80s and 90s, it was simulation. Maybe it was simulation of like a fantasy world, but it was still simulation, where I think you're absolutely right. It's all about player experience now. And I think one of the trends we're seeing, which is very heavily driven by the player experience, is much, much more simplified rules overall, right, in all the games. I mean, I would say that's really
I wouldn't call simplified. I would call them faster, because you move the complexity somewhere else, and you maintain that in the game as a whole. But the players feel like they don't have to go and reference a rule book to know what's happening on the table.
That's a better way to describe it, because you're right. There's still depth of complexity, hopefully, and depth of strategy, but they're easy to learn, easy to pick up, and most of these games now, you play them, you come back to them after a couple of weeks, and you're like, oh yeah, I remember how this works. And all you're looking at now is, how does my particular unit function, not how do you roll, how do you shoot again in this game? How do you move again in this game? How do you charge in this game? All those rules are very simple to understand. And that's what I mean simple, but very easy and straightforward, and like riding a bike. And now you're just talking about the specifics of my particular model or unit, right?
Right.
Which I think is brilliant. And I think you see that a lot. Most of the modern miniature games, I would say most of the miniature games now are there. I do think there are some folks pushing the boundaries of simplified rules right now, or again, how you want to call them, very, very straightforward rules. I would say, I would think Mantic really started getting to the hyper, like 3-page rule set. Unless they tried do some crazy stuff not too long ago. Yeah. And now GW's gone there as well with like 6 to 8 pages of rules for the entire core rules. And I think that's really impressive if you can get to that point and still have a game that feels like it's got meat on its bones.
Well, also you bulk that out. It sounds like it's a small rule set, but that's just the process for moving units and resolving their attacks over courses of turns. The game, what makes the game difficult is obviously in the missions,
right?
Which we're seeing, and I'm surprised we didn't see this happen with GW. I was really expecting this next edition of 40K to do away with randomized missions and to move to some sort of a player-driven choice system, because so much of your game can get balanced off of your mission system. Your units can be so broken if your mission system is good enough. It can withstand so much more imbalance a miniatures game.
That was what made Dust. We used to rave about the Dust Tactics miniature system, right? Because you can go through and you could kind of build your. There was a player sort of like pregame.
It was part of the game.
Yeah, there was like a pregame where you worked out your mission and you kind of each sort of bid for what you wanted, and that was awesome. And that was a really, to your point, Mac, that's where they went, and I thought it was interesting. I think a lot of the companies now have gone to this more.
I designed that.
I know, I remember. And it was fantastic. We loved it. We talked to you about it when it first came out. We were like, this is awesome.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm surprised more people haven't done that one, simply because
Me too.
It solves so much of your metagame.
Yeah. And it was great.
And you can then solve it with updating that list.
Yep. Now, the cards are simple. So a lot of folks, it seems to me, and this is another one I wanted to talk about on my list, was when I thought about this segment, was mission cards. So I think I remember, Craig, you and I on this show on like episode 1 or episode 2.
Oh, it was crap. I have my homemade cards still.
We started trying to make mission cards for our favorite miniature games like 40K and everything else back in like whenever this show started, 2008 or whatever. And now it seems like, and I think I remember begging on the show, please everybody just make mission cards. Yeah. And we wanted 2 different decks. We wanted a mission deck and a terrain deck, or a deployment scenario deck. And I think we're kind of there now in many of these games. So like Rune Wars does that. 40K is there. Sigmar's there. I think a lot of the games now have these sort of deck-driven mechanics, and I think that's clever because it's super easy to expand. But to your point, though, it's still random, right? There's still not a. Although I think what's interesting about the way Rune Wars does it, Mac, is kind of a little bit like how your Dust kind of did it, but simplified. So you lay out 3 different cards for mission, and you lay out 3 different cards for sort of terrain. And I think I'm getting this right, Craig. One of the players picks the mission, and the other player picks the battlefield. The deployment, that's what it is. 3 different cards for deployment, 3 different cards for mission. So, and the thing is, the first player gets to choose whether he's going to decide the deployment or going to decide the mission, and the other player gets to pick one card of the opposite 3. So if Craig decides to choose mission, I get to choose the deployment zones we're going to have, and if I choose deployment zones, Craig's going to choose the mission. So what that does is... Oh, go ahead.
I just wish they'd updated it just one more step, and that could have been genius, which is before the process of picking, you deal out 3. Mm-hmm. The player who's going to pick first picks 1 card to remove from the pool. So you deal out your 2 rows of 3.
Yep.
He pulls 1 from the pool. Your opponent pulls 1 from the pool. Then the player who's picking first picks first, and the other guy picks.
Oh, that's cool.
That way you can eliminate.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you don't want to eliminate choices from when there's only 1, because if you're the second player choosing, your opponent's just going to pick from the options and you've ruined yourself.
Yeah.
But you can also hijack and be like, well, I want that one, so I'll remove the other one. And so now there's this give and play between the 2 players.
Yeah, that would have been even cooler. But it does have a little bit of that, though, because you're trying to decide, well, there's a really good mission in there I don't want Craig to pick. So I'll pick the mission and yield the deployment zone. Or you'll see, man, my army's more of a slow mover. I don't want that deployment where it's diagonals because that's such a long walk for my guys. So
and
so
what you're going to discover is the better players are able to read that metagame.
Yes.
Which is why you put in that. I would put in that extra step.
I like that.
It brings up the medium players because it gives them a moment to purely think about what their opponent will do.
Yeah.
Right.
And it teaches them to be. It brings the like. It's tricky when you design these games because you want to bring everyone up to a certain floor, but you still want to leave room for excellent players to excel.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Yeah.
What else? What else are you noticing, Mac?
The big one for me is the shrinking of the rule sets, but also the much more cinematic focus on the rules. Mm-hmm. I mentioned earlier that people are more focused on what the game feels like, and you see that a lot when you hear the guys from Blizzard talk about what they look for when they balance MMO characters, or even the stuff for like that new one they've got, Overwatch, right?
Yeah.
And so what they're really focused on is when you sit down to play this character, what fantasy are you trying to fulfill, right? Why do you want to play Conan? So how do we tell these stories, and how do we build mechanics that focus on that? And it's hard with a miniatures game because the thing you're looking for most is an experience that you can't create through narrative. Mm-hmm. You're trying to give the player a moment to make a decision that appears to be life or death, and see if success or not hinges on that. And they can only get to that point through turns and turns of play, and it can only happen in so many games. So you have to make it happen as much as you can and be as fun as you can make it. So on the occasions you lose and your gambles don't go off, you feel like you're not just gambling, but you feel like you took your shot and you take your losses, right? Like you remember it's got the dice, and it's so hard to walk that line. And I'm seeing so many more games figure out the tactics to doing it. A great example, resources. They're all putting in resources that deplete over the game or over the round. And the game is now more about managing those things. Yep. We see it a little bit with Psychic Pool and Psychic Power before. We've lost that in 40K, which is interesting because they've gone away from some of those things. But look at Privateer Press and the way their game functions almost completely on the movement of that resource, right?
Yeah,
So that
Privateer.
it can be about that
I think they
experience.
pioneered that concept, right? And I think that was really interesting that they went that route. And that dovetails into one of the things I think we've seen more of. And I think now, if a modern war game doesn't have a component for this, I frown upon it. I know, and that is some mechanic for luck mitigation, right? So I would say that's
my resource.
Yeah, but it's resources, but it's also like, but you're right, exactly, because I think the key is it's very frustrating. I mean, you have to have luck in these games. It makes it more interesting. It adds a dynamic drama. Otherwise, it's chess, and chess is a great game, but real life's not purely predictable. So you want that luck in there, but you do want that ability to mitigate it so it's not completely luck. And I know Privateer did this again with boosting, but you see it now in almost all these games. There's either some kind of mechanic, like in X-Wing you can focus, right? Or in 40K now you get the command points. So there are ways in all these games to kind of double down on your ability to hit or your ability to strike or your ability to withstand hits. There's the orders and bolt actions, so you can choose. And when you're making these orders, right, you're deciding whether I'm going to be more faster this turn or more accurate. But at least you have a chance to be more accurate or a chance to be faster, and it's not completely luck either way, right?
There's a dirty truth to that mechanic.
Yeah.
It's not put in to mitigate luck. It's put in mathematically to raise the average closer to the maximum so that the attack itself on average is more reliable, and therefore our math when we're balancing internally is more reliable.
Well, more reliable is less luck, Mac. Anyways, like from my point of view as a gamer,
but it's not less luck. It's specifically making it so you could make something more reliable while it still maintains swinginess by giving it more dice. What this does is it raises the effectiveness of the dice in play, so that you don't bump into your creep.
Right. But exactly. So anyway, even if it has just the illusion of adding, I mean, that's what you want, right? Because you don't want that. Right. You want to, when you lose one of these games, what you want to feel is, great game, and either Craig, you outplayed me, or man, if I hadn't made that mistake, I think it'd have been closer. What you don't want to feel like is, the dice aren't with me today, right? You don't want that feeling, because then you feel like you didn't control the game or have any influence on the game, right? You want to have as a commander, it's your commander's choice to win or lose, or your opponent's skill or your failure or some combination of that led to the results of the game, not just. I mean, for me, and I know some players don't care; they just want to roll around and have fun, and they don't care how random it is. But I think for many players, they want to feel like at least they had some impact on how the game went based on their strategic choices, right?
It's fun at the end of the game when it all comes down to one dice roll because the two players were so evenly matched and we've been having a good time for an hour. Right. It is not fun when the game comes down to a dice roll on turn 3.
Yes, exactly right. And that's that's what happened in some of these older games before we worked out luck mitigation. Now, I think the other way, I think another interesting thing about how Games Workshop is luck mitigating now, like I think one of the problems with the old vehicle tables were that, if you roll a 6 and a 6 and a 6, that bajillion point model that's the centerpiece of your army just blew up in one shot in turn 1, right? Now, that can't really happen because of how the overall rules are structured, right? So
they just did the easy thing. They said, how long do we want our unit to survive?
Right.
What's the average damage output of various types of units in the game versus anti-infantry versus anti-vehicle, et cetera, et cetera? How many wounds do we need to give this vehicle to make sure it can last at least 2 or 3 rounds of fire? And you'll notice everything has a ton of hit points now to just make things last longer on the table.
Now, you're a game designer. Is that easier than just making a table of 1 to 6 with exciting explosions? Because I think that's a lot of work, it sounds like to me, to try to figure out all those averages and what the medians are and everything.
Well, you're doing that as you build your system. It's harder with a game like 40K where you have to go back and reverse engineer it.
Yeah, right. They
had apparently the freedom to kind of do what they wanted with stats.
Yep.
I think things like maybe Space Marine stats are a little locked in, but for the most part, they had a lot of freedom. So I think they built their spreadsheets, they figured out their math, or they just got testing. A lot of this math can be done with gut checks and with fellas like, that were like you guys or the other, when GW finally reached out to the community for some help. There's a lot of gut math that can be done by groupthink there.
That's fair. But I love that. I like that, and I look for it now in games. And so if I'm looking at a new miniature game and there's not some way for me to feel like I can influence how my dice are going to flow, I feel like I want that, So
you want a deck of cards or something.
I want something. Yeah, well, Malifaux did a great job because I can cheat. So Malifaux's got a similar thing, kind of like a different twist on on what Privateer did with boosting, with this idea that I can cheat the cards, and I have a limited number of those things. And so all of them having these kind of options, I think is really, really smart and makes you feel like you're much more in control of the game. Part of it's probably an illusion, but it's a nice illusion to have.
Well, and Malifaux also solves another math problem, which is the streak. You can't really have – your streaks can only go so far in Malifaux. Right. There's only so many aces in the deck.
Right.
You can cycle through, and there's – it happens. But the game in general kind of slows the streak, and then by having more cards in your hand, the math is a lot less about what random number got generated and more where you are able to place your kings and queens during the play.
Exactly. So that's super. That's cool. So I'm liking that trend a lot. What do you guys think about? There's a couple of things that have been tried before, but I think they're sort of becoming. I don't know if perfected is the right word, but they're working out really well. And I would say the first one I want to talk about is the hidden simultaneous movement. Right. So I think X-Wing kind of brought this back. Although you've seen it before, like Wings of War had it, and there's been other games a long time ago that tried this stuff. But I really think Wings of War, Armada, and now Rune Wars have really sort of honed the system down to something that is it probably makes movement take a little longer than it doesn't. Although I'm not so sure because measuring is very simple.
Let me ask you this: when you're playing Rune Wars, do you feel the analysis paralysis especially when you're playing those big double starter box games? Do you feel analysis paralysis when you're trying to decide what all of your units are going to do, or do you find that you just move from left to right and it just kind of falls into position?
It pretty much flows. What's interesting about this is you don't notice it because both sides are thinking at the same time. So this is the brilliant part of it. So because it's simultaneous plotting, right? If Craig's thinking about his and I'm thinking about mine, so it's not like in a game where you go, I go, where I'm waiting for you to think about how you're going to move all your units, and you're thinking carefully, Mac, because it's a big turn for you, and you're trying to plan out your entire turn. We're all playing at the same time. And I have imperfect knowledge of what you're going to do, so I don't really know for certain what you're going to do. So that kind of reduces some options. And,
that's much easier. Yeah. I think about that. Because your opponent is, yes, it's using a lot of time where you're thinking, but your opponent is thinking at the same time. So I guess
it's an illusion.
That's nice that it comes out to wash. That would always be my concern with a game that scales up to that size, right? Because you only ever have 3 or 4, maybe 5 things on the table in Star Wars, in X-Wing. But that's not the case in Rune Wars.
But what's also interesting, Mac, is you make it up later, too, because during the movement phase, when it's your turn to move your guy, because what happens is in Rune Wars and in X-Wing, right, the activation order is dictated by some of the moves you chose. So now once you're activating, it's just, well, who's got the lower initiative? This unit. Flip over his orders, and you move. There's no thinking when you move because it's already been pre-plotted. So you just go.
You're just handling the procedure.
Right, so everything else is procedural, right? So all the thinking happens at once in the game, and it all happens up front, and you're all doing it at the same time. So while the game may not be faster overall, there's no perception of analysis paralysis since you're thinking simultaneously. So it's a really interesting mechanic, and I like also
that's really nice.
The unique feeling of not knowing what my opponent's going to do, because we had several times where in Rune Wars where when you charge, you have to pretty much declare you're charging on your dials, basically. And if you fail a charge, there's a penalty. And if you impact the enemy unit without particularly declaring a charge, there's also a penalty. So you have to kind of guess, am I going to impact him? And is he going to impact me? Is he going to charge me, charge him? There's been several times like units stare each other down and face off over the hill, kind of waiting for the other guy to make the move, which is actually kind of realistic. It's like, do I go first or do they go? So it's kind of a neat... You do things you wouldn't ever see in another miniature game. And I think GW tries to emulate that with the whole roll for how far you can charge thing, and sometimes you don't get the charge if you didn't roll far enough. In this game, there's never that, oh, darn, I didn't get a good roll. It's like, oh, darn, I chose poorly because Craig faked me out or I guessed wrong, but that's all my choice. There's no luck. It's all what I chose to do, which is really interesting.
I also think it's faster because you have all of your options right there. Right? They're on the dial. You know exactly. There's a very finite amount, and you can immediately start eliminating some of those options because of the situation that the unit is in on the table. And what you're looking at is you might have an agonizing moment. Well, like, am I going to go for the early attack that does less damage, or am I going to go for a later attack? It's like so it's the timing of everything more than anything else, really, because your unit's going to have a job. And it has a physical place on the table, and you're trying to figure out how to get it to where it needs to be to do what it needs to do. And so I think that makes it a lot faster, the decision process a lot faster, because it's not so much that it's just all free form. It's that there's very specific ways that I can move, and there's very specific things that I can do, and they're all right there on that dial, and then they're going to dictate a couple other options that I may or may not have, and that's it. So I think that makes it quicker also.
Now, it does limit a lot what you can do, but I think it's really interesting. I think that's really interesting, and I think it's interesting that Fantasy Flight has sort of made it a hallmark of their miniature gaming.
Well, they've got that dial. They got the slick dial tech.
Yeah.
It's not, impossible for other people to replicate, but they've clearly got it down.
Yeah, they do. Now, one thing I think is interesting too, Mac, and I'm interested in your take on this. So if you look at the Warlord sort of thing they've got going on, because we talked about Malifaux's thing as cards and Privateer's thing as the focus mechanic, and now we're thinking the Fantasy Flight's thing is the whole, hidden movement dials thing and move templates. I think Warlord's gone down the path of Bolt Action, Conflict 47, and Gates of Antares all use the integrated turn, but you don't know the activation sequence because you're pulling dice from a bag trick, right? Yeah. So, which is really interesting. So, for those unfamiliar who haven't heard us talk about this before, you have a certain number of units on the table, and instead of Craig moving his entire army and then shooting his entire army and then I doing the same thing, this game you throw a colored die in the bag for each of your units you have. So if Craig's playing the brown team, he puts all his brown dice. If he's got 10 units, he puts 10 dice in the bag. I do the same thing with my dice. We shake the bag up. We pull a die out. If it's my color, I pick one of my units I haven't moved yet. I use the die to declare the order. The different images on the die are different orders. I move the unit. I leave the die next to the unit to tell us that we've used that unit. And then we go back to bag to see who goes again. I might get lucky and get another one of my colors and get to activate another unit. Or it could be Craig's, and Craig could get 3 activations in a row. So it's an integrated turn system, except you don't know if Craig's going to get 3 turns and I'm going to get 1. Craig could get lucky and get them all pulled, but then that means I'm going to get to go with all my units at the end. As units die, their dice are removed from the bag, which means it gives more and more likely for your opponent to get to go first.
I love the mechanic simply because it solves I've got a bunch of guys, you don't have many, we're trying to do alternating activations.
Yes.
There is a problem where you obviously solve it by going when one player runs out, the other guy gets to activate everything.
Right.
But that effectively, when you look at it, it actually makes one opponent go first next turn.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Once they take that hit, and that's a huge advantage, being able to have a bunch of guys act while they can't do anything.
Yeah. So I think it's a really neat mechanic, and I thought the randomness of the sequence would bother me more than it does, because there is a mitigating factor for it, right? There's some points you can spend to, or there's some, it's like almost like a war gear list thing you can take, where I can force my opponent once per game, it gives me a token, and I can force him once per game, he pulls a die out of the bag, he has to put it back in and draw again. So I can have these little things to kind of help mitigate some of that at key moments in the game. But they cost me points against my army list. So I got to choose, am I going to have these tricks or am I going to take more dudes on the map, on the board? So
but that little trick could be so clutch at the right moment.
Yeah, exactly. So you almost have to have it, right? Craig used to go deep on those little toys.
Yeah.
That's well, those are also great for filling point totals.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly right. So I like that. I like that a lot too. So I think, you're still seeing a fair amount of games that are you go, I go, right? Privateer's still down on it. GW hasn't changed that. But you're starting to see these games that have both. Obviously Warlord, also the Fantasy Flight stable, also because of how the dial systems work. It's integrated. It's based on an initiative structure, so you don't really have a certain knowledge that all your guys are going to go over your opponent. It's all kind of happening who knows when, which I think is really fascinating. What else? Any other trends you guys have seen? Craig, how about you? Anything you're really enjoying seeing lately?
Well, I think it's very interesting. The thing that we were talking about earlier is the army scale.
Oh, yes. I meant to mention that. Yeah, good one.
Is, for what feels like forever, but it's probably, objectively, probably like the last 5 to 6 years, skirmish has been king, right? Mm-hmm. You've seen the army scale games go down.
It's king because it's easy to make a new skirmish game. It's hard to make a board.
But it's also it's king because it's easier to paint the force. It's cheaper to collect the force. It's easier to find the space to play the game. There's a lot. There's a lot going for it in the gaming community, and I think all of us who are getting older and having maybe less space and less time, and I think there's an aging gaming bubble maybe that contributed to it.
The game stores are also set up to handle a 4 foot by 4 foot play space for 2 players much easier than a 6 by 4, simply because of Magic the Gathering.
Right.
True.
Oh, exactly. Yep. And so I think for many, many years, we've seen lots of really good companies kind of jump into that space and sort of claim it. I mean, War Machine obviously was the first, and then I mean, you can argue whether or not they're skirmish scale at this point.
They're not.
But they can. But they can be.
Back to skirmish.
Yes, I wanted to say it too. They just announced a new skirmish game, so they literally last weekend at Origins. War Machine has acknowledged that they are no longer a skirmish game, and they've announced Company of Iron, which is same miniatures, same core rules, but it's skirmish, Warhammer, and War Machine and Hordes. So they've gone back. So they have actually backed up and said, yeah, we've created this army scale game, so now we're going to create a skirmish game. So
I have been trying to get a company to just make both games at the same time.
Yep.
It's like, guys, it's just 2 different books.
Well, I think that may be what Privateer has done here.
Well, that's what Mantic just did.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. And I think Wild West Exodus tried to be that, right? Remember when they first launched, they were like, we're everything. You can play us at any size model count.
Well, you've got to change the rules for small model count.
I think that's what they made a mistake.
Function different at those points, but yeah.
Yep. I think you're right. So I'm interested. I'm looking forward to seeing Company of Iron because I'm curious if it's really just, it is the same exact model. So I'm curious if it's just a slight tweak. And they say specifically in the Origins announcement that it's pretty much the core mechanics of War Machine, just in a skirmish mode. So Mac, I think it's kind of close to what you were looking for there. And Mantic's doing it too. So this may be a trend where we're seeing, but Craig, you're right. There's a lot more Army games coming. You got Antares just came out. Conflict 47 just came out not that long ago. Rune Wars is out now. 40K is back. Age of Sigmar was a big hit. Mantic's all in on their big Army scale stuff. So there's a nice stable now of Army scale games that are back and hot. But it is interesting also that there's a couple of these guys. But GW also just released their skirmish game, right? So, or re-released, I guess, the new flavor of that. So, and now Privateer's got one too. So maybe Mac, it is going in that way where what they really want is many different rule sets to play with the same models, so you get more value out of your models. Or another way to look at it, so the company can sell models into different player bases. Because I may only have the resources to buy one giant 40K army, but I might not mind having a few models of orcs just to play around with in the skirmish game kind of thing.
You know what's going to be interesting with Privateer Press is they have the integration of their RPG into the miniatures game, and if the skirmish game works much differently than the miniatures game does, which I doubt it will. They said it's the same rules. I'm betting Company of Iron is a lot better fit for the RPG when you're trying to use those rules to play your characters.
Well, the RPG actually core mechanics, I played it several times, is the War Machine and Horde's core rules. I mean, it's
right, and I'm hoping that Company of Iron will be a good replacement for
they're doing this across the board. So even Undercity and Widower's Wood, the core mechanics are still 2 dice pushing and boost. I mean, they're still keeping that everywhere. So it's almost like their signature. Like all of our games run on this stuff. This core concept. Kind of like GW's always roll to hit, roll to wound. They do the same thing, blitz to skill, wound. So they definitely have that theme going on. So it'll be really interesting to see how this works out. And GW's got the same stable. It sounds like it'll be interesting to see if Fantasy Flight goes down this road. Also, it'll be very interesting to see that because it seems like it's a trend.
I think the next step with any big miniatures game would be RPG and skirmish integration.
Yep, that's right. That would be interesting.
And they have announced that there's going to be new role-playing games for 40K and Age of Sigmar. So who knows if that's going to blend in also.
That'll be interesting. Good one, Craig. I forgot. I definitely want to talk about the scale because I think you're right. There's definitely a feel of Army scale being back.
Yeah, well, if you think about like what happened Army scale-wise, you've got like Kings of 40K and Fantasy both stumbled, right, in the last couple of years. And then you had them... I think it's working for them now, but inflict a terrible wound on themselves in the process of growing, in the way of growing pains with Age of Sigmar, and then you had Mantic Kings of War is now huge, and then so you had all of these other things. Then Mantic's got their science fiction game in, and then you've got Bolt Action jumps in with Beyond the Gates of Antares. So you have these army scale games all of a sudden flooding, and then on top of all that, probably finally feeling the pressure, reacting to the market, you have GW kind of like rising from the ashes almost, it feels like at the moment. And now, again, you're spoiled for choice on army scale. Not that I think skirmish is going away.
That window has been threatening to close for years. people have been like, look, GW has exposed themselves. They are ignoring part of their community, specifically the most vocal part of their community. Those people are dying for a new game. And frankly, no one produced a war game scale game during the time when GW was the most vulnerable. And I mean, if as a GW fan, I'm ecstatic that they're doing this big turnaround, right?
Mm.
Yeah.
We'll see if that holds up mechanically, though. They've made a lot of changes, and we haven't played this thing for years.
Right, that's true.
Right, this thing could break on us.
Yeah.
So let's be gentle with it.
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, I'm cautiously optimistic, but keyword on caution. So I think one other thing, and this brings up a good place to maybe sort of wrap up around. The other trend I'm seeing, Mac, is, and I'm curious what your thoughts on this, is very iterative rule design and very exposed and community feedback rule design. So Privateer's gone around the horn on this a few times, but where they've landed now is they do like if you watch them on Facebook, they do like month-long to 2-month-long sessions. It's like, hey guys, it's Trencher month. And they go in and they come up with new rules for trenchers and they put them out in a beta mode, and you can try them out and you can download them on their app and you can try them and you give them feedback in the community and everything. And then by the end of that period, they permanently and officially adjust them for that unit, right? And it's like
it's the only way I can think of to do that.
Right.
With a game their size, I would like to see 40K adopt something similar.
Yep.
I would like to see almost every company adopt something similar. The reason it works is, one, it means that everyone's going to go buy that unit if they don't already have it. If they have it, they're excited for that month. Now they're engaged. That's the best thing you can have. But more importantly, this miniatures games can't be balanced in the traditional manner, which is to hammer thousands of games, see what floated to the top as problematic.
Right.
That's how you balance video games and so much else. You can't do that with the miniatures games. They take too long to play and there aren't enough players. You can't generate 1 million games during
a weekend,
during design.
Right.
So this is just about the only way to make sure going forward that it stays balanced and good.
And I think that's smart. So the trend we talked about earlier about moving the complexity into the units, this is something that all the companies have done now for the most part. Privateer did this a long time ago, and others are doing it now. I think that's smart because now for game balance, you're just tweaking units. You're not tweaking core rules. It's not like this core rule is broken or all flyers are busted or all vehicles are busted. It's just, no, those core mechanics are the same for everything, which is, I think, one of the best parts of 8th edition. Those mechanics are all the same now. Now it's just, oops, we really should have tweaked, this particular unit a little differently. And if we just tweak them now, so all the companies can figure out, methods to make these adjustments. And I know Privateer is getting mixed reviews on this because a lot of people are saying, well, wait, I don't want my rules changing all the time. I can't keep up with it. And that's a fair concern. I think what helps them there a little bit is War Room and the fact that you just pull out your iPhone and the latest rules are there.
Yeah.
So,
that change is always difficult, especially with something that's such an analog game trying to come into the modern world.
Yeah, so I think it's going to be, if everybody else can get there, and GW's going there, I know GW's got a pretty slick looking app for Age of Sigmar. So if they can get there with that, and if Fantasy Flight and Weird and all the other folks out there can figure, and Dystopian Wars and all those guys can figure out ways to iterate on the rules like this in a way that's not like, okay, rebuy your cards again, because that's the biggest problem, right? You don't have to rebuy your freaking cards. And so I think this is the true marrying that everybody's been playing around with forever of how to marry your iPhone app to your gaming or your mobile app to your gaming. It's really your mobile app is your current rule set. Get those 8 pages of rules on your phone. Get all the unit cards on the phone.
Get a fresh PDF.
Yeah, I'll subscribe for $10 a year or whatever it is to get all the cards on there for my army, and I'll just know every month I'm always up to date. I don't go to read an FAQ. I just bring it up and there it is, right, and ready to go.
Can I make a wild prediction before we go?
Yeah, please. That'd be awesome.
Wild prediction on the future on miniatures gaming trends. I'm on topic.
I love it.
So
nice. Okay.
I'll preface it just a little bit. In the past, we've seen mechanics like pre-measuring come and go, come again, go again, come again, go again, because we constantly forget about the benefits and flaws to both sides. Like some games you want to pre-measure, some games you don't. Mm-hmm. It's easier for new players. Treadheads really like it. It has a visceral feel. Like there's a whole thing, right? There's things you can and can't do based on that choice. I think line of sight is going to be the next big innovation area. We saw it with True Line of Sight.
I hate True Line of Sight.
I dislike it. I dislike it too, but that's because it approached True Line of Sight was approached from an inherent previous line of sight, or what I call structured line of sight.
Yep.
Viewpoint, where they tried to create structured line of sight using true line of sight, but there was a mistake, and I think we're going to see it get fixed really soon with line of sight for a lot of games, where instead of building your math so that when I roll my dice to shoot you, I'm resolving a clear shot, and then you get bonuses for cover. I think what they're going to start doing is just go, we assume everyone has cover at all times. If you have this very clear line of sight, which is very easy to adjudicate, look, nothing's in the way, boom, you get a bonus.
And dead zone.
You look, oh, I can't see it all.
Yeah.
I can't make the shot. You change the way the math works, and once more games can be built from the ground up, I think this is how we're going to start seeing line of sight done.
Craig,
because you're not trying to get variable levels. You're going, can I see, can't I? Can I just see you in the open, can't I? Those are very easy questions to answer and keeps the game going very fast.
Doesn't Dead Zone do that now, Craig? I think
Dead Zone does that exact thing.
Yeah.
Is that how Dead Zone does it?
Yep.
Yes.
And I want to say there's another game that recently did that, and I can't. What? Is it Blood and Plunder? Blood and Plunder.
Blood and Plunder has something similar. Yeah. Yep.
Blood and Plunder has something very similar.
So, Mac, your idea is brilliant. People are starting to fiddle with it. So you're on the
right.
So your prediction is already true, Mac. You're such a prescient.
I guess it wasn't too much so as prophetic as I thought it would be.
Well, but I think that's interesting because it is a good point also that some of these, lesser known, not as big games but they're out there making their mark, are starting to experiment with some of these new rules. And I think you're right. I think line of sight's one of those areas where I just like to keep it simple because I go back to the whole, I know the magic cylinder and all that. Yeah, but I do like I like the magic cylinder approach because at least I know what I'm looking at on the table, right? I know what I'm looking at.
Also, the human brain is designed to do one thing. It's a giant organic computer that puts objects in space.
Right. Exactly.
And references where they are so that you can move about in that space that you're constructing in the back of your brain. Right. So when I ask you to do line of sight and it's abstracted at all, or it's using a mechanic system, you're like, this doesn't it's the thing that breaks down the fastest in a miniatures game because every human brain is good at calling out the flaws.
Right. Yeah. Right. That was one of my favorite things about Tannhauser, with the board game that was a miniature game, was that you could just draw the lines between the little dots on the board and however many things you went through. It was super simple. The color coding was awesome. That was my favorite thing about Tannhauser. So, well, Mac, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us on this episode of the D6 Generation. We really, really appreciate it. Hey,
thanks for having me, though my game got canceled.
Oh, we're sorry to hear it.
And I'm glad we were here for you on this day of days, but I'm sorry you had to go through it.
Virtual hug, Mac.
I'm glad we didn't record everything beforehand.
Yeah,
that's true.
But Mac, here's the thing: if folks want to find out more about what you're up to, what you're doing, what you're working on, maybe your latest book, whatever, where would they go on the internet to find out what you're all up to?
Well, I had to plug another podcast, most of it.
That's fine. That's all right. Friends here.
Facebook. I'm always on Facebook, but I'm on. I have another podcast, The Dice Decide.
Nice.
I do that with a few friends here. We talk about a lot of 40K and other gaming stuff. We're just general gaming. So if I'm up to anything, that's where I talk about it first, or that on my Facebook page.
Awesome.
All right, cool.
Mac, thank you so much for being on the show. Really appreciate it, and have a great summer.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll keep. Now, are you going to Gen Con?
Not this year, unfortunately. Did not have. Yeah, I had to. I had to choose where my funds went, and I might need to get a cover for a book, and I might have to pay for that out of pocket. So.
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
Well, have a great summer, Mac, and we'll see you.
Good luck, and we'll talk.
All right. Take care now.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.
This Jever Notice is brought to you by all of our friends over at Patreon. The men, the women, the boys, the girls who put their money where our mouths are. That's just unsanitary. You should never do that. Today, in particular, I would like to thank Toby Sterling, Todd Alstrom, Todd Whitty, Tom Kenny, and Tony. Thank you, guys, for helping us keep this dream alive and keep this show floating forward. Do you ever notice how often you have these moments in your life where you don't realize what was missing until it's back? I'm having that moment with Warhammer 40,000 right now, and I know that some of you are probably sick of hearing about Warhammer 40,000 right now, but that's what's happening. That is the zeitgeist, if you will, the spirit of the times, and so I'm going to talk a little bit about what's going on and where it's coming from and why it's there, because I always think. Now, human memory is a very funny thing, because we don't actually remember things as well as we think we do, and our mind always tailors the memory that we pull in, sort of colored with what's going on now and what we need now, what our mind needs at the moment, and so our memories are very malleable. And when I think back to the heyday of 40K, I think that that the podcast was happening at the same time, and that's not true. The podcast actually came around at the end of 40K, and I was desperately holding on, and Russ and Rafe, had already turned their backs, and Russ had completely turned his back, and it was like sort of like crumbling in its last death throes as far as our local group was concerned. But that wasn't always the case, and I forget that, for instance, my time working with Games Workshop and my time with you guys did not happen concurrently, and so I went through a lot of stuff that I think that I've shared with you guys, and I don't think now that I have, which is interesting to me because it kind of ties in with what's happening right now. And the key was that for a very, very, very long time, years and years and years, my entire gaming world was Games Workshop. Warhammer 40,000, to a lesser extent, Warhammer Fantasy, Necromunda, Mordheim. I never liked Blood Bowl, so that wasn't it. But then on top of that, when Russ and John opened their store, Daka Daka, they knew how to run a store, and the way that you need to run a store is you need to constantly have events and gin up the excitement of your base. And so we were always running these gladiator matches and these catacomb games and chariot races, and they're like anything you could imagine doing with these miniatures that we already had. We were doing, and they would come up with these rules, and I would come up with the terrain, and we would come up with just these really cool sort of immersive games, which is kind of what's happening nowadays with all the other games. That's like sort of a thing now, but back then, as far as we knew, we were the only ones doing it. And so I was reading the books, I was thinking about it at night, and I didn't even realize that 9 times out of 10, as I was going to sleep, I would be thinking about the fluff or the games, never really like rules, like Matrix gaming the rules or anything, but like, oh, I remember this game and that stuff. And that was kind of like, I was going every Tuesday night. And when I met Karen, I was also going every Saturday. And for a very long time, she was okay with me going every Saturday. So I was going 2 or 3 days a week. I was there at the store, and it was all Games Workshop. And so when I had the offer to go to work for Games Workshop as a trainee for their regional director program, and the name was in constant flux. That was like Metro Manager. There was a bunch of different ways it was referred to. I like jumped at it because it was so important to me and I loved it, but it was all the retail side, which is what I had no interest in. I had all the interest in the world of, even then I wanted to write. I wanted to, I loved painting the models. I loved making the tables, which is ultimately what I ended up doing. Even though I was working in the stores, I was, making the modeling, big boards and things like that. So, it was a lot of fun. But it became a job, and it had a brutal commute, and I found myself all of a sudden I was not enjoying this thing that was this huge part of my life for years and years and years, and it was almost like I had been cut off from this part of me that I needed to find peace of mind and to go to sleep. So I was going to sleep at night, and I wasn't thinking about the fun I was having with 40K and fantasy and the worlds that Games Workshop created. And instead I was thinking about, oh, this happened at work and that happened at work. And it was a negative experience overall for me. I'm not working at Games Workshop, but having lost that piece of the puzzle. And ultimately, I mean, a lot of different things happened, and I was offered an awesome opportunity to go to England and complete my training there. Sounds like I was going to be a Jedi, which would have been way cooler, and I would have said yes. And for a raft of reasons, I ultimately said no, which in the corporate culture of the world means that people well, we've been throwing resources at you and offers and being really nice to you, but you don't want to do this, so we're kind of going to cut you loose. And I got cut loose, and that was fine. But I stayed on because I enjoyed the discount and the people that I was working with. Really enjoyed the people I was working with. I had friends, I had made friends with the people who came into the store regularly. And so then they cut my hours, which was fine. And then ultimately they were like, we're getting rid of all the part-timers. So they did that. And then they got rid of all the stores. So, so that was fine. But I felt much better. And ultimately a big part of the reason that I said no was because I had loved it so long, but then it became like it was gone and I needed it. And so I needed to get back to it as my love rather than my job. And I did that. And for years longer, I still did it. We would go to games day. I have all these different armies. And so when that died away locally, I clung to it probably longer than anyone else around here. And I had my armies and I kept them. And then when I started selling my armies on eBay, it was a jarring, wrenching emotional experience the first time I did that. But I wasn't playing the game anymore, and the game had moved to a point where I wasn't enjoying the games that I was able to get, and so it faded away. Locally, I stayed reading the novels, and I would get the rule books when they came out, but even that started to fade. Then Fantasy Flight and Ross Watson kind of pulled me in and helped me out, and Tim and the whole crew at Fantasy Flight brought me on, and I started writing for Warhammer 40,000, the role-playing system, and I wrote for almost all of them. I didn't write for the Imperial Guard book. I don't think I wrote for Death Watch. I did everything else, I'm pretty sure, and I didn't enjoy it, and it was almost as if I had the pendulum had swung in the other direction, and this world, these worlds that had meant so much to me now were just like exhausting to me. And it sort of, again, it was because it was a job. I was writing rules for role-playing games. I wasn't writing stories, and I wanted to write stories. I wanted to be invested in the story, and instead I was trying to figure out, okay, so this is what the model does on the table. How should that translate into the role-playing rules? And that whole side of things has never really interested me. And so it kind of squeezed the last little bit of interest out of me. And that all did happen during the podcast. So you guys have experienced that, whether or not I've said it explicitly, or you've just kind of witnessed it as I just talk to less and less about Games Workshop. But ultimately I got to a place where I was just, I think I called it grim darked out. I was just all I can't do any more writing assignments where it's you need more grim dark and that whole thing. I just lost it. And then here I am again with 8th edition has come out, and I'm very intrigued by what the company is doing on a business level. I'm very intrigued by the fluff being moved forward hundreds of years for the first time in 30 years. And I'm enjoying my games, and for the most part, the people who I'm playing with are enjoying their games for the first time in a really long time too. And last night, as I was going to sleep, I found myself thinking about the Imperial Guard Index that I just got and the cool Imperial Guard models that I have, and I thought, oh my God, I'm back there, which is a very comfortable, nostalgic place for me to be. And then, of course, I'm always suspicious of nostalgia, because that's kind of how we are trained now in this world. Is nostalgia valid? And so I don't know if it's a great game, but it's coming at a great time. And I'm really enjoying getting back into it. And it was such a huge part of my life for so long that I'm just really enjoying kind of immersing myself once more into the world and just going through all my old models that have been treated harshly, unfortunately. But like armies that I haven't touched and I know since my son was born. And that's weird to me, but I'm excited. And I don't know where it's going to lead, and I don't know if it's going to last. And I know it's not going to, it's not sustainable as far as the way it used to be, where that's what everybody was playing. Already there's a bunch of guys who are refusing to jump into it, and I'm a Guild Ball guy, or I'm this guy, or I'm that guy, which is totally fine. And I like playing them in those games too. But I know that not everybody is sharing my experience with Warhammer 40,000, is all I'm saying. And so it'll be interesting to see what's happening next, because it's not like I still don't love Beyond the Gates of Antares or Blood and Plunder or Dead Zone, which we mentioned in this episode, or any of a number of those other games that I've learned that I've picked up over the years since I dropped Warhammer 40,000. So it'll be interesting to see whether it becomes just another kind of game in the rotation, or if it really does kind of build itself into a prominent place again. It'll be interesting, and I'm sure you guys will find out whether you care or not. That's about it. Thanks for listening.
Achievement unlocked. You've made it to the end of another D6 Generation episode, the podcast whose humor has universally been acclaimed as not too horrible. Please let us know what you thought of the show by either emailing us at info@thed6generation.com or by posting in our official D6G episode thread at the top of the DACA Discussions Forum on DACADACA.com. If for some inexplicable reason you actually enjoyed this show, you can help others find out about it by leaving positive reviews on iTunes. See you in 2 weeks. Thanks for listening, and happy gaming.
The theme from Total Fangirl comes from the soundtrack of The Last Night on Earth, the zombie game, courtesy of Flying Frog Productions, and is a composition of Mary Beth Magalanes.